Welcome back to the recording. Um, yeah. Okay, Nathan. Oh, Elliot's giving you a mic. And Elliot, you'll make sure it's on.
Good morning. Nathan Bennett representing oil and gas. We had a three-person group over here, and I think one of the consensus we arrived at was that the state land board report to us was extremely helpful in framing the things that we've been hearing about and talking about the last couple meetings. Would have been arguably awesome to have it at the start, but nevertheless, we have it, and I think we found a lot of value in what was contained in those pages.
Thank you so much. And Nathan, I'm glad you mentioned that because we have been talking on the back end about how it was exactly what you said, how it would have been so nice if the legislation required this interim report to be done, this coming month, and it had to address the stewardship trust and interim and internal improvement and saline trust. So we had to start talking about those early, but of course we were just in the process and there was no time for the state to have that done yet. And so in any case, it was a flaw in the process, but in the end, we agreed that at least having you all dig into it so that once you got the report, people were sort of primed, but totally agree that it makes the process of thinking about the stewardship trust in particular sort of iterative, need to be more iterative. And that's, yeah. Someone else, other comments just in terms of what stood out for you or what you're coming to today's meeting with in particular in the room? One other? I saw you guys talking. I know you had things to say. You can share what you heard from your neighbor. I feel like I'm going to call on somebody. Oh, great. Yeah, go ahead. Nicole, was that you with your hand up? Whoever had your hand up, please go ahead online. Commissioner Houck, was that you? Oh, yeah, we're struggling to see quite well in the room. RT, did you hear anything that might be helpful to hear from one of our colleagues online that we can call on just in terms of things that people are reflecting?
I wonder, Jonathan, if you'd like to finish your thought that you were kind of speaking to when Ryan started again.
Sure, I spoke a little bit to parcel identification and maybe it's a little tug of war between what we know and what we understand and then what we're trying to put forward as recommendations. And I think one of the challenges is that especially those of us that maybe are more familiar geographically with one part of the state and not others and how parcels are currently utilized and leased, and then looking at we're really trying to examine some of these layering opportunities, and then how well do we actually understand what are some of the opportunities in these new areas, especially around conservation, environment, and recreation, and things of that nature, and then how do we understand what existing conflicts have shown themselves. I think we have a good understanding of some of the more traditional and long-standing uses that we want to preserve and we understand on leasing parcels, but how to layer these things together, I feel like we might have a little bit of a information gap and maybe we're a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. And that was kind of a couple of things I was expressing to the group online.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think you're not alone. And I think the chicken and egg, sort of what needs to come first, sort of echoes what Nathan was saying too. I mean, I think there's just so much iterating in this process because partly we wanted to front load a lot of information. And I know you heard a lot from the state in the first two meetings, but without going overboard because we also wanted to be hearing from you all. So it is just a perpetual balance of getting enough information to be able to make meaningful recommendations, but in a way that's participatory and right. So thank you for calling that out, especially around parcels and regional sort of knowledge and familiarity. Okay, any other final reflections before we go into today's agenda? And Tim might ask you to screen share now if you don't mind. All right. So in terms of the flow for today, and I'm just looking for, yeah, perfect. So on the next slide, Tim, if you would go to slide 2, is again, just to reiterate the purpose for today. Thank you. Okay, so you all have this in your agenda, but really we're going through the materials briefly that you all heard, but that you saw, but really mostly getting your questions, getting your feedback, and then having some time to really discuss possible recommendations for the stewardship, saline, and internal improvement trusts. We also have a few updates for you on the tribal engagement process, on the process for getting local priorities regarding parcel and parcel uses from the regional partnerships and counties. So,
Ryan,
yes,
Ryan,
please.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We only see the browser view of the first slide right now.
Interesting. Hey, Tim, if you escape and go back to the, can you see that now, RT?
Yes, now we can see slide 2. We couldn't see it in slideshow form.
Interesting. Okay. So we may have to keep it on. Okay, we're going to try one more thing. So while we do that, then we're going to go just to today's agenda. The couple things I want to call out is in a minute here, we're going to have a chance for public comment. I don't think we have anyone here in the room that has from the public who wants to make a comment. RT, if you could ask folks to just put their hands up if they're a member of the public online and want to make a public comment, we're going to do that. I also just wanted to call out, we're going to take a break midway through the morning and at about 12:20 to grab lunch, but we're going to keep at the end of the day between 12:30 and 1 before the tour have sort of a preview of the tour. So there'll be a couple opportunities for breaks, but we also want people to take care of themselves and stand up, move around, use the restroom, whatever, when you need to. So we'll talk about that in a second.
Brian, we have 2 people who'd like to give public comment.
Perfect. So we will go to that in a second. Thank you. That's good to know. Will you go to the next slide, please, Tim? So there's the brief agenda. You have this in front of you. You can go to the next slide. A couple of we've asked this at every meeting, but you all have already raised one of the balances of offering enough information to have this process have you all be able to engage meaningfully, but also have enough time for you all to participate and engage yourselves. So we're going to just ask folks to do your best to share the floor when it's time to open it up for questions and comments. Be succinct, share what's important to you. This group is all about how to meet all of the interests represented here. So we're just asking you to listen with curiosity and share what's important so that we can keep that collaborative problem-solving lens always in this group's work. And then a couple of housekeeping notes. For hybrid work group members, we definitely want you to be able to participate. We're sorry not to have you in the room. Please use the hand raise function on Zoom or put notes in the chat, and RT will be our connective tissue. And likewise, for the people in the room, use your name tent if you want to, or otherwise raise your hand. And if anyone, RT, is your sense that everyone who's a panelist, who needs to be a panelist, who's a work group member is a panelist? We're good on that front?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, excellent. We're doing Zoom webinar again so that people can tune in live, but it means it's some extra hassling. So just so you all know, that's sort of how that's working. And I did want to say for people who are traveling, you do get reimbursed for your travel. So please talk to Nick in the back if you need to get reimbursed, and we have W-9 forms here and whatnot. All right. Sam, any other housekeeping you can think of that I haven't mentioned? The restrooms are right outside to the right if you need to use the restroom. And if you need to just call for a break and it's time, just raise your hand and we can do that. We're just going to be flexible with today's meeting. All right. I think we have 2 members of the public who want to make a comment. We're going to ask you to keep it to 2 minutes or less, and we are going to set a timer just so we can keep going, but we do want to hear from you. So I think what we're going to do, RT, is have you unmute them so so the 2 members can each give a comment.
Sure. I'm going with the first. There we go. Tarn, I think you had your hand up first.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Tarn Udall. I'm a lawyer with Western Resource Advocates. WRA really appreciates the work group's dedication to this effort and the support and expertise of agency leadership and facilitators. I know you all are taking a lot of time out of your day jobs to think hard about state trust lands in Colorado. I would urge the work group to put forward specific recommendations in the upcoming interim report for advancing stewardship and access outcomes in the stewardship trust, as well as the 2 trusts benefiting state parks. With regards to the Stewardship Trust, encourage you all to think about recommendations that encourage the land board to take the long view when stewarding those parcels, including by considering more stringent standards for how and when lands can be removed from the Stewardship Trust, and ways to improve compatibility of revenue generating future uses on those trust lands, including non-perpetual conservation leases that can be layered with agricultural leases. With saline and internal improvements trusts, these are uniquely situated in our view as they benefit state parks. So the beneficiary, state agency charged with conservation and outdoor recreation mandates, is very well aligned with the work group's own charge. And so if the work group could put forward specific actionable recommendations for those trusts, I think it will set itself up for a successful overall effort, including in how it wrestles recommendations for arguably the more complex school lands. So with those trusts, I think there are opportunities to improve wildlife and access outcomes, namely through allowing the beneficiary more flexibility by recommending that the lands benefit all of the Division of Parks and Wildlife, not just the park side of the agency, and examining a process for transfer from the land board and CPW where desired by CPW as beneficiary. Those are small recommendations, but I think they could deliver a meaningful punch for Colorado's wildlife, namely through expanding state wildlife areas and for access to outdoor opportunities. Thanks again for the opportunity to provide public comment and for all your time in this process.
Thank you, Taryn. And many of the things you just said are exactly just in line with what discussions have been recently and ideas folks have had. So thanks a lot for your comments. Really appreciate it. I think there was one more, right? RT, go ahead.
Yeah, John, go ahead.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Rader. I'm a public lands attorney with the San Juan Citizens Alliance down in the Four Corners. We're a conservation nonprofit representing about 1,000 members, and we've been engaged on state trust land issues for several years. Thanks to you all for diving into the policy details. I know it can be really dense and it's early in the process. But I'm really looking forward to the work group's recommendations. I wanted to emphasize a couple of important factors, several of which Taryn just mentioned. One is that there's a need for a clear assessment of compatibility for parcels that are within the stewardship trust, not to prohibit or hinder legacy uses, but to ensure that 300,000 acres of stewardship trust lands in Colorado are protected for natural values as voters intended. So I'm looking forward to a rubric or criteria to help frame those choices. I'm also interested in looking at the low-hanging fruit of intra-trust swaps. I think there are opportunities to take action towards consistent management of adjacent parcels and reduce administrative burdens there, especially around state wildlife areas. I'd also ask you to consider option value in any appraisals of long-term value. That's a economic concept that's similar to opportunity cost, and it's important to the intergenerational nature of the trust. Thinking about how we quantify and account for option value. I know Dan Catheen's work with PERC is relevant here, and I hope the work group has an opportunity to consider that in detail. And then finally, I'd like to encourage you to consider a conservation leasing pilot project down the line. The updated ecosystem services lease policy has some language in it about voluntary termed leases for conservation. This is a great first step, and it'd be great to flesh out the details around valuation, lease terms, et cetera. Compare and contrast those models with other Western states' approaches, and then think about a particular parcel or package of parcels for proof of concept. And lastly, thanks to the working group and the agency staff for all your work. It's really promising, and I think there's some achievable win-wins for public schools and natural values.
Thank you so much, John. And just reiterating what I said after Taryn's comments, they're right on and spot on with what this group has been discussing, really consistent. And we'll be recording all of that in our meeting summary and appreciate you both coming. All right, Aaron, I skipped over you. And Tim, if you go to the next two. Yeah, so what we wanted to do before we dive into some of the substance of today, you all have in front of you a handout with we've been working on a schedule and a work plan to try to get to all of the aspects of the legislation. And so this is the new and improved. And Tim, if you go to the next slide, Aaron's going to walk us through at a high level.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us in person and online this morning. As a reminder, my name is Aaron Ray, Director of Policy with the Executive Director's Office at DNR. And I'm really excited to see the work that you all are doing progress. as Ryan mentioned, we've updated our planned schedule for the remaining meetings. I will note that you'll likely see this continue to evolve over time. We're trying to do our best to foresee what the work group will need, but I do want to note that we will be, making changes as needed to this. The key point, I think, as Ryan mentioned to start, is that we're moving from a phase in which we shared a lot of information with you. You got to know each other. You got a sense of your colleagues' priorities and preferences and values. We're now moving into a phase where we're really going to get serious about considering recommendations to be included in the final report. And what you'll see is today and meetings 4 and 5 will really be primarily focused on developing recommendations for that final report. One thing that I'll note is, as I think we've probably articulated before, we expect that to be an iterative process. You'll have some conversation about sort of big picture principles. You'll get a chance to drive those into very specific recommendations. And then there'll be time over multiple meetings for you as a group to wordsmith those recommendations, see if there are things that folks can come together on around those recommendations. But we really want to give that process time. And that means using these meetings over the next few months really focused on refining those recommendations. The goal will be to get to meeting 6 in May and have a pretty good sense of what that universe of recommendations looks like after we've gone through the next couple of meetings. Meeting 6 will be really focused around, let's refine that list. Now that we have a sense of what the universe is, let's get serious about figuring out what the work group can focus on in the final report. We also are holding time in meeting 6 for anything else we haven't done yet, right? We've tried to scope this out in a way that's doable, but we know there's going to be topics that we just run out of time for. So we're holding time in meeting 6 to kind of be spillover from anything else that we haven't done. Anything that you have questions about, any issues you don't feel like you've had a chance to address, we want to make space in that meeting to do that. Meeting 7 in July will be about getting to a final report. And then meeting 8 in August is approving that final report as the report from you, the work group. What you'll notice both this meeting and those last 2 meetings is there's a lot of time devoted to getting those reports done. And the thing that I want to share there is you'll probably be aware, getting to a report that we can send to the governor and the General Assembly is an intensive process. It's multiple drafts. There's a lot of review by you as work group members, a lot of back and forth with revisions. And ultimately, there's a lot of work to just package that into a public report. And so it may seem like we're devoting a lot of time to that, but that's because it takes a lot of time. We really can't be making changes to a final report the day before it's due, or even a couple of weeks before it's due, right? We have to get those reports done well ahead of time. So that's why you see so much time and multiple meetings devoted to finalizing those reports. We want to give you time to finalize the substance, and then we need time to finalize sort of the mechanics of the report. The last thing I want to say is that you'll notice today, meeting 4 and meeting 5, we've tried to lump together topics that the work group is required by statute to address. And as you've heard from me before, and you'll see again, we're going to really try to keep focused on what the statute requires of you. There are other things that you all are interested in and that you all may want to include, right? You can go beyond what is required by statute, but we need to do the stuff required by statute first, because that's the thing that the law requires. And if we have more time and interest, we can certainly consider other topics. But you'll see we've tried to lump those together in the next few meetings. The last thing I want to say, and then I hand it back to Ryan, is as Ryan noted, you've received a draft of the interim report. We are going to spend some time today hearing from you, your feedback on that, right? This is intended to be your report as the work group. So we really want your feedback. We're going to ask you what's missing, what was mischaracterized, what you would want to say differently. We'll take that feedback from you. We will revise that first draft, and then we will share a second draft with you in a few weeks, give you one more chance to look at that before we finalize that in the next meeting. But I just want to note, we're going to really ask for your feedback today and in writing after this meeting. This is the time to get your feedback into that report. When we get to that final draft that you'll see next, hopefully we've addressed all the issues. We don't want to be making significant changes at that point. If we have to, we'll do what we need to do. But I want to encourage you, take the time to get your feedback into this draft so we can get that in a report out. I'll talk more about that when I come back. Anything else, Ryan?
I just think to find out, here, I'll share this. If anyone has any questions or comments. Look, you're so good, Lloyd, with putting your, hang on, we got to get you the, Mark, do you have the other microphone? Let's see. Oh, Elliot, could you grab it, hand it to Lloyd? Thank you.
So my question would be about if there's flexibility in terms of between these different meetings when certain things are discussed. Of all of the different dates we were shared for this task force, the one where I'm in a plane going over the Pacific is the one where you have discussion about recreation, which is one of the things that I'm one of, I think, 3 folks here representing different recreation interests. So if there is a way to do it on another day, it would be very much appreciated for me and hopefully for recreationists. It would be bootstrapped if I try to convey my thoughts to someone else to hear to discuss. So anyway, just throw it out there.
Thanks, Lloyd. I appreciate that. As I mentioned, there likely will be changes. We'll take a look at that and see if we can accommodate that. Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Including from the folks online, we can't see you in the room. So RT, I might just ask you to let us know if anyone's hands are up.
We don't have any hands right now.
All right. Thank you very much. And I will be back.
Okay. The thing also, just to add to what Aaron said, is just to emphasize we got feedback from all of you and we agree with it, that there is this really delicate balancing act between taking time in these meetings to actually have some discussion, but that means loading you with a lot of information outside of meetings, which is a heavy ask. And I know that some of you struggled with getting through it all. So we're just going to keep trying to do that balancing act and really appreciate your feedback on what's the most helpful, getting you information between meetings so that we can use these meetings for dialogue, but not having unrealistic expectations or burden. So welcome people's feedback. All right. Any other comments or questions on the schedule? And then we're gonna, okay. And then Tim, I think we're hearing from you next, right? Okay. So you all may remember early in the process that there is a requirement in the legislation to get input from regional partnerships, counties, local communities on their priorities. And so Tim is going to give you an update about what's happening on that front to get that, to do that outreach. Do you want to? Yeah.
I can do both. Yeah, so as Ryan mentioned, there's some pretty specific language included within the legislation that requires DNR to specifically solicit parcel nominations from both the Regional Partnership Initiative as well as counties. And so we have started with that process. Here's a look at that specific language within the bill. And here is sort of our look at the schedule for outreach to the counties and regional partnerships. As I mentioned, we started this process with a meeting with the regional partnership leads. This is a program facilitated by Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and asked the regional partnership leads to go back to their regional partnerships and solicit nominations for parcels from that group. We've also begun outreach to the counties, had a meeting with CCAT last week, and then have a meeting on the books with CCI on the 6th. Taisha has also helped line up a session at the Colorado Municipal League's annual conference, and that'll be in June. We just got word yesterday, I think it was, that session proposal was selected. And so we're still waiting on the specific date, but looking forward to having that conversation there as well. And then one more that isn't on here and wasn't specifically required by the legislation, but I think is worth noting is we will be having a conversation at the Partners in the Outdoors conference down in Colorado Springs in April. And so that'll be a session led by Nicole and myself. So specifically what we're asking the counties and the regional partnerships to come back with us with information on is laid out here. We put together a nomination or a parcel nomination form, just a Google form with some instructions that highlight kind of how to look up where these parcels are using the State Land Board's GIS website. And then specifically ask for some information around, why is this parcel being nominated? I think, one of the unique things that the regional partnerships and the counties can offer is just local context. And, folks who have familiarity with future opportunities on those parcels. And so that's the short of it. We have not received nominations just yet, but we'll make sure to keep the group up to date with those nominations as they come in.
Two questions. Okay. We're going to come around with the microphone. Here's Elliot.
Okay, Tim, my first question is, does this correspond with their normal process for proposing projects, regional partnership projects? And do they have to look to the GOCO and CPW funding for these proposals?
Great question. So to the first part of your question, no, this would be outside of the scope of their regional partnerships, go through a regular planning process to try to lay out priorities for recreation, conservation, agriculture. This would be outside of that process. And the second part of your question is, we're not asking either the counties or the regional partnerships to come up with fully baked ideas around, how a proposal might be funded. We're really just asking them to identify specific parcels that have unique opportunities for conservation, recreation, agriculture, keeping it to the legislative ask.
And when is that due from them?
So we have asked folks to submit their nominations by February 27th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I see Steve and then I think Steve and then Steve. But Steve's, yes, go ahead first. Yeah.
So does this include nomination of parcels to be put into the stewardship trust? So if an RPI wants to nominate some parcel to be incorporated within the stewardship trust, is that how this is the process they would use for doing that?
I think it could help inform those conversations that'll in the decision-making process that ultimately happens with the land board. But we're not specifically asking, we're not getting that specific. We're just saying, are there conservation or recreation opportunities on a set parcel, right? And it could be something that might make sense for the stewardship trust, but it also could be something like a fence removal project or a restoration project that a county or regional partnership, is in the process of taking on or is interested in working on in the future.
And Tim, just to clarify though, you're asking the regional partnerships and counties, what's the reason they want to nominate it? Like, what are the uses and the values? So hope that will be articulated too.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Steve Whitty.
I guess my question is very similar to Steve's. I don't think it's clear what they're being asked to nominate to do. It's not made clear in the interim report. And in this presentation, it hasn't been clear what the purpose of the nomination is. So if it's just for anything that might be useful for recreation, I think that needs to be clarified, not just limited to stewardship trusts or any other particular program. Secondly, I'm concerned about the fact that there are places in this state that do not have a regional partnership formed yet. And how will outreach be extended to those counties that lack any functioning regional partnership, particularly those that have a hell of a lot of state trust land in them?
Yeah, great question, Steve. I think to your first question, we've really kept it focused on the legislative ask and have really just asked them to identify parcels of interest to them for agriculture, conservation, recreation purposes, and sort of left it at that. I think you're right that we haven't gotten into the specific details around how that use may be accomplished in the future. But given our timeline, I think that's about all the time that we have available to, have those conversations amongst counties or amongst regional partnerships. As for the gaps in the regional partnership coverage, we are just having to go with the regional partnerships that we have on the ground right now, and hope that, conversations that are happening in this room can help inform, areas that may not be covered already.
So I see, thanks, Tim. I see Martin has a hand up. And also can I just add on one thing, Tim? Let me grab this. When I've asked a similar question, Steve Whitty, as yours, when I've asked the question of how do we think these nominations are going to be useful? And what I have heard, and correct me, state team, if I'm wrong, but what I think I've heard is first, they will be useful for the land board to have this information. Secondly, that they'll be useful potentially to this work group in hearing what priorities are from around the state, whether it's from regional partnerships or from counties or from cities or other local stakeholders. So, and in order for this group to be able to draw sort of broad principles around it seems like, whether it's related to outreach ideas, whether it's related to, criteria, ideas that you're seeing, themes that you're extracting. So I don't know. That is what I've heard. But Steve, I think it's a great question. It's important. And I see Aaron's come up to answer, and then we'll go to you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks for the question. And the substance of what Ryan just articulated, I think is absolutely right. The one thing I want to qualify is just flipping the order. The statute asks for you as a work group to solicit these nominations. This information is for you as a work group, first and foremost. You get to decide what we do with the information, right? Subsequently, I think Ryan is absolutely right that the RPIs, the counties themselves, certainly the state land board, can make use of that information, but this is a function of the work group, and this information is to inform your recommendations. And so we have time later in the meeting schedule to talk about what feedback we have gotten through that nomination process and how you as a work group want to incorporate that feedback into your recommendations. But that's the function of this process. Can it be used for other things? Absolutely, and it probably will, but it is to inform your recommendation. I just want to make that crystal clear.
Distinguish between parcel level analysis and like thematic.
Yeah, and this is a question we've gotten a lot is someone comes forward to Suzanne's point and says, I want to nominate this parcel and I want it to be used for this purpose. Again, you as a work group need to decide what you're going to do with that information. What I've articulated before and what I would encourage you to think about is I don't believe this work group has the time or the expertise to go through state land board assets parcel by parcel and make specific parcel level recommendations. What I would recommend, and this is what we'll bring to you when we talk about your review of the information that comes through this nomination process, what I would recommend is you look at those parcels and how they were nominated, and you identify some themes or principles that would be useful to the state land board as they're doing their work. Are there certain kinds of parcels that should be considered for certain kinds of uses? And you could make a recommendation to the state land board that says, for these kinds of parcels, think about these kinds of priorities. That would be my recommendation to you as a work group in terms of how you ingest this information. And we'll bring that back to you when we've gotten it. But that's how I would expect that you'll be able to think about the information that you've got.
Thanks, Aaron. Okay, so we're going to Martin, and then Nicole had her hand up, and then I think I saw Aaron's hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you. Just could you share with us, the members of the board here, the whatever solicitation you sent out to the regional partnerships, so we could maybe forward them to the contacts. So maybe it goes to maybe ask them to put at the top of their inbox and maybe take another look if they happen to miss it over the holidays.
Yeah, it's great suggestion. We can definitely do that.
Aaron, I think we're,
That was my question.
oh, good.
Can you put it back on?
Yep.
Online, just to see.
Okay, we're going back.
I just want to see the form again to know what was submitted, because I think our questions are probably questions they're going to have as well. Like, what are we nominating for? Who's going to use it? Maybe it was in there, but if we can help clarify that, we'll probably get better information back.
Great. And I did send this PowerPoint to everybody last night. So if you need to like zoom in on the screen or go back to something, you have it. Nicole, we can't see you right now in the room, but I think you wanted to chime in.
Aaron covered what I was thinking. Thanks,
Okay.
Ryan.
Great. Any other comments or questions online? And then we'll keep going. Oh, Suzanne, go ahead.
Yeah, so I would expect we will have questions outside of what's presented in response to these forms. Can we have some kind of group special call with the regional partnership leads to flesh it out? You know, I mean, for our normal regional partnership process, the scoring committee, we have lots of questions so that we really understand what's what and what they're asking for and why. And I would think we need some kind of way for all of us to follow up with questions so that we can make appropriate recommendations.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, maybe we can revisit that and wait and see what we get back from this initial ask, and then have a conversation about what additional outreach might be.
But I think what I'm hearing is that it would be really helpful from a work group perspective to have more interaction or have a time to ask questions, have more discussion on. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Suzanne.
We have one more question from Nicole.
Perfect. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back. So I think another way to look at these are parcels of interest. You know, we have 6,000 properties, and I think, as Tim described, we're casting the net far and wide by including not only the RPIs, but counties and local governments to just tell us from their point, you know, their vantage point on the ground, what are parcels that have particular promise? And then, as Aaron was saying, that is fodder for the work group to consider further. So I think you can consider this like a filtering exercise where, you know, rather than the sort of formal nomination process. So I don't want to confuse it with nominations for stewardship trust. This is just telling us where there are parcels that hold particular opportunities. So hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Nicole. That's actually useful clarification. Appreciate it. Okay, good. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to keep us moving. But again, if you have follow-up questions on this, folks can stay afterwards. We can certainly keep reporting back, and this is just the first you'll hear about this. Okay, so Nick Massey, as you all recall, you received from us a report from the state that's required in the legislation specific to the Stewardship Trust. This is what Nathan was referring to earlier. A lot of really helpful information to the conversations you're having. And so we asked Nick to give a quick sort of what he thinks is especially significant in that report, and then a time for you all to ask questions, make comments before we move on to the rest of today's discussion regarding that report.
Fortunately, I have two-handed notes and one hand to flip them with, but good morning, everyone. Nick Massey, Deputy Director at the State Land Board. Nathan, was it you that appreciated the report out loud? I owe you $100. Thank you. That feels really good. Our staff worked really hard on what we've presented in there. It's a distillation of thousands of pages of material and hundreds of hours of expertise. And so the hope with that was to, in addition to stepping into the requirements of the bill, to demonstrate ways that we are, in our opinion, realizing our mandates of financial accomplishment with stewardship efforts on the Stewardship Trust. So I just wanted to touch on a few things. Can I have the slide, Tim? So here's a summary of the 4 asks that were made for that report. And a couple of notes. It's a point in time data set. Although many of our leases are long, 10 years, sometimes longer, leases do start and stop. So keep in mind that there may be leases that may not appear on that list because they already ended or they may start soon. The hope from State Land Board's side of things is that it gives you the information you need to start to wrestle with the concepts of recommendation. State Land Board is super receptive to wanting to do more and better with all of our trust lands. We all want to do great things on these properties. And so the hope is by feeding you that information, we're beginning to demonstrate the ways that we enact our mandate. The report gives you specific information on the natural values that are present on each of the Stewardship Trust properties. And we hope to demonstrate the different uses of these working lands that at a minimum are protective of the natural values that they've been designated for. And in many cases, they result in improvement of those values over time through lots of careful planning by staff and implementation by the stakeholders in the lease and the property. In the report, there's a brief narrative at the beginning of each section that is hopefully our explanation of what we hope you take from that section of the document. And then each of the narratives refer out to exhibits that give you that detailed information based on the segment of the law. A couple of the exhibits were kind of unwieldy, so we link those out to a separate spreadsheet. Hopefully those pieces are working for you. If they're not, please raise a hand at some point, get it to our attention. We want you to have all that information. And I want to make a point that in the report, we used a phrase that it's sort of a starting point. If this group wants to see more, needs to see more, please say something. It's a fantastic effort to this point, and we're happy to try to do more with it. But I wanted to say that the report, thanks. I wanted to say that the report intended to go a little bit further too. I mean, there was very basic prescriptions on what needed to be provided in there, but there were some important tools for context building that we've provided as well. So we've provided full samples of lease stipulations from leases. We've given you an entire Stewardship Trust management plan rather than try to summarize those concepts. We wanted to let you see those things in action the way that they appear in lease contracts. And, all of those things are informative to the way that the lease relationship works. Those are expectations that we're placing by contract on the people who are using those working lands. A couple of the things that, so we've shared around that FAQs document. We're seeing all the things that you're submitting through to the consultants with your questions, your concepts, your ideas, and your initial recommendations. And so, from that list of things, you get to see what kind of leasing we're doing, specifically on the Stewardship Trust. You get to see some of the activities that we're doing to respond to conservation needs on trust lands. Those were a lot, those concepts were repeated a lot in those FAQs. This slide. Oop, that's the last one. And then flipping to a couple of real specifics about the Stewardship Trust, we've shown and spoken about the depth that we go to in terms of planning activity on all trust lands. The plans that we build for long-term care or care over time, small investments periodically that add up to big results. But on the Stewardship Trust, you see that those things happen to an even greater degree. We're a lot more, in some cases, we're more explicit on exactly what needs to be happening on Stewardship Trust. And we just build in more stipulation. We build in more responsibility for lessees. So on the slide, there's a notification process when we're considering uses of stewardship trust land. Lots of people get communication from the state land board to say, hey, something's coming up. We need your input. Please provide that. And one of the things that state land board is very proud of is that we are as transparent as we can possibly be. We engage with public comment at our board meetings. We publish all of our contact information on our website, and so people will pick up the phone and call us when they have questions and they want to talk about stuff. But this is a formal structure in which we're adding comments, concerns, needs for special care for stewardship trust properties to be part of the file, to be part of the public record on the actions that we're taking. I have the slide. And so I think I've touched on most of those things. I think we accomplish getting out to stewardship trust properties for more frequent inspection than some of our typical leasing. And I think that's what I wanted to say about that report. Again, we are open and receptive to comments about it, needs for additional information. And I think the mechanisms to provide that information would be to get in touch with Ryan's team, Mark's team, to let us know thoughts and questions about those things. But I'll be back a little bit more in a minute.
Do you mind staying up here in case people have questions? Okay, so wondering if people have questions, if people have comments about this report, either in terms of, I think Nathan, you said a few words about this at the beginning, but new information that it gave you that you find helpful, questions, things that you didn't find in there that you would have liked or that you might want to know more about, or otherwise. Yeah, Steve Whitty, I see, and then Matt. Maybe we'll go to Matt first because the microphone's with him, and then we'll go to you, Steve. And then folks online, let us know if you have questions or comments.
Thank you. Matt Samuelson. I'm with the Public School Construction Assistance Board. That's the BEST Board's official name, so I'm trying it out. Thank you so much for the report. Super helpful, and I think it's going to improve our conversation going forward. There's two things that I was thinking about as I had a chance to flip through it, and one of them was, would it be possible to get some better information around the revenue on those stewardship trust leases as well? Because we've had some conversations around the reasonable and consistent income mandate and how that's balanced between the entire portfolio versus parcel by parcel. And then the second thing that came up for me as I was flipping through it is moving to the recreation portion, seeing that information from the other states where a lot of our neighbors have free access to state trust lands for recreation, or they have low cost permits. And I'm assuming we're going to have a probably in-depth conversation about that, but it would be helpful if we had a better understanding from some of these other states, how they are actually managing the multiple uses on these lands. So if you have a grazing lease on there and you're in Montana and it happens to be a parcel that there is recreation taking place, like just as an example, like some more information around how some of the other states are actually handling potential more recreation on their lands than that what we're seeing in Colorado.
Yeah, Matt, thanks for the questions. Happy to put together some data on the revenue that comes from stewardship trust lands. Give us a little time. It takes a little bit to crunch those numbers because we're trying to create that by shapes on a map, but we'll absolutely get that to the whole group so you can see what sort of revenue generates from those properties. And actually, we're going to touch on it when we go out to the Lowry today. Hopefully, you're going to join us. But and then, Mark, do you want to?
Yeah. Okay. In terms of, Matt, your second part about the hearing about from other states, what they're doing and how they're handling these sorts of, how they're managing these things. So what you saw in the report was just part one. Part two is that Mark and his team are actually doing some research with other states over the next month or so, and we're planning to bring that to you before and for the next meeting. So you all have some information about how other states are handling some of these challenges. So Mark, do you want to say anything more about that at this point? No? Okay. Yeah, thank you. Steve Whitty, go ahead.
Say, Nick, I was digging into the weeds a little bit on this exhibit A5, which was an example of a grazing lease in, I forget if it's Lake County or whatever, but there's imposed on that same section of ground 2 recreational leases. One to Parks and Wildlife under the Hunting Fishing Access Program, and another to Alpine Ski and Sport. But the grazing lease has a term and condition in it that requires reporting of recreational activity. Does that mean that the grazing leasee is required to report on how many hunters visited the property during the year? What does that mean, and how is it implemented?
I'm looking across the room at my experts. Do you want to say something?
Yeah. Nate Medina, Recreation Program Manager. That's the Crystal Lakes parcel up in Lake County that's shown in the exhibit. And there, it's more a request of any unauthorized type of activity is what it's looking for. You're correct. It's in the Hunting Fishing Access Program, and it allows public hunting and public fishing, but there's other uses that we have had issues with, and our ag lessee just is one of the other eyes on the ground to provide us with information if there is issues. That's it. I believe so. Is that that condition in that?
Yeah, Lindsay Brandt, acting stewardship trust manager. Yeah, so the exhibit to the ag lease just requests the lessee that if they are experiencing issues with hunting and fishing access, that they do let CPW know. And that's just based on feedback we've had from ag lessees that they have, conflicts with some of the hunting and fishing access. And so we have said, hey, if there is problems, please report it right away so that, we can take action on that, or CPW can take action on that. But they're not expected to be monitoring the daily or weekly or monthly use of the recreation.
Yep. I think so. Nick, we just talked about this legislation requiring us to solicit feedback from counties and some local areas. Has the land board ever done that in relation specifically to parcels that could be nominated for the stewardship trust? And if not, is there anything that would prevent the agency could solicit that feedback and take that into account, right?
Handing off to an expert again.
Lindsay Brandt again, and my predecessor, Mindy, might want to speak to this as well. But when the stewardship trust when the portfolio of properties was initially being built, there was a big outreach effort to various groups and counties statewide to get input on what properties should be designated. We don't kind of actively do that outreach as often now, but we do have a place on our website where anybody can nominate a property if they'd like. And so it's kind of our general practice is if somebody wants to nominate a property, they can nominate a property. I think we have it set up now that just to reach out and talk to us, because often people will nominate a property that we don't own the surface or that we don't actually own. So we try to work with those parties just to make sure we're all on the same page about what property they're interested in, and work with them to do that nomination. But we do get nominations occasionally from folks.
Sorry if I cut the line. This is really helpful. I'm wondering, and maybe I just need to dig deeper into some of the reports, but if there's a way to evaluate outcomes, so if we can look from the initial baseline from which these parcels were nominated and see based on the management decisions, what is the ecological or open space or viewshed, whatever the purpose for which the parcel was included, how has the management affected the outcome over time? So that's what I'm curious about. And I know that might be very difficult to look at all of them, but to see, have these management decisions improved outcomes for those purposes over time, and comparing it. I know there's stewardship plans for other parcels as well, which also consider a lot of these factors. So is there a way to say this has been successful? This hasn't? Are these parcels being managed, from lack of a better term, better from an ecological other perspective than other parcels that also we know have important values? That might be an unfair question, but
That's a
what's
fair,
the outcome
that's a
based
fair
on these
question. Yeah.
decisions?
Yeah. As many times as I've said, we're trying to do things that make things better over time. It's a fair question.
Yeah, I would just add to that, we do inspect these properties every 3 years, and I would say we don't have like a quantitative assessment of every single parcel that's going on. We would love to, that would be great, but we don't have the capacity for that currently. But we do qualitative assessments. So with every, we call it like our triennial visit, our every 3-year visit, we are looking at the conditions on the ground and noting, hey, I think we need some work over here. Maybe we need to talk to the lessee about addressing some issues, or like, oh yeah, things are looking relatively good. We're still seeing, the rare plant of concern, or we feel like the habitat's looking okay. We feel like the grazing's been managed well. So that is kind of the primary role of the stewardship trust manager, is just really, in partnership with our district managers and our lessees, is keeping tabs on those things and making sure that they are staying in the condition or better that we designated the property for. And Mindy would like to add something.
Hi, I'm Mindy Gottsagen. I'm the Conservation and Services Manager and manage the stewardship team. I was also the first stewardship trust manager and began that position in 2011. I just want to point out, when the properties were first designated into the stewardship trust in 1998 and 2000, we didn't have baselines on hardly any of them. And those are completed over probably the next 10 years. And so that was the first kind of baseline that we had. We're still developing metrics on how do we quantitatively measure improvements on the properties. We're beginning to implement tools like the floristic quality index that actually measures the kind of the species that are present on the property and gives an indicator of what are the non-native versus native species, kind of a marker of what's the relative quality of those properties. Those tools didn't exist back then, and so it's hard to measure in a quantitative basis how we've improved those properties. So, but we're beginning to look at that. We're also looking at some artificial intelligence kind of mapping things that can also help us measure improvement and comparison of those properties compared to the region.
Oh, thanks. I'm interested in your eliciting comments. And so from CPW, their understanding of high priority habitats continues to evolve. Like every 4 years from each quadrant, ECMC has to look at what updates to the maps they might approve, that kind of thing. And so since some HPH habitats have seasonal closures, if you get a comment now revealing HPH, or it hasn't been taken into account effectively, what do you do with that information? Does that then become a requirement for lessees, or only a BMP? Or I just wondered what happens. And the other thing is, you have reference to fencing, and I wondered if that means wildlife friendly fencing or just fencing generally, how you look at that. So thanks.
Yeah, so regarding HPH, we look at that high priority habitat a couple of different times. So, on a stewardship trust property, it's something we like to just keep in our awareness, in our management plan of like, hey, we know that this is high priority habitat for mule deer or pronghorn, whatever it may be. Additionally, you know, not just on the stewardship trust, but on all leases, those proposals, like for any new lease, we're talking about a new proposal, those proposals do go to CPW for comment. And if they recommend a timing stipulation or a no occupancy type stipulations, we typically apply that to the lease as a lease stipulation. We don't retroactively, like if we have an existing lease that's been in effect for 10 years, you know, we're not necessarily going back and saying, hey, you have to change your operations, right? If it's already been happening on the ground, we're not necessarily retroactively applying those types of stipulations, but we do get feedback from CPW and try to work those in as much as possible. And sometimes, you know, an applicant might say, we can't do this project if we have this timing stipulation. And then it's a question of like, are we going to move forward? Are there other alternatives? Can we find an alternative site for you? You know, so it depends, but that's really a conversation that happens between staff and the project proponent and CPW. You know, there was a recent example I can think of where we had a proposal for like a cell phone tower. I looked at the data and I said, well, I don't see any high priority habitat here. We sent it over to CPW and they said, we're actually just about to update the map because we found out that this is a migration corridor and we've been collecting all this data. We just haven't updated our layers yet. So because we had that conversation with CPW, we were able to kind of catch it and say, yeah, actually this probably isn't going to work here. And then your question about fencing. So we do put stipulations in our ag leases and other leases that fencing needs to be wildlife friendly. We're not asking our ag lessees to go tear out miles of fencing and retrofit it, but anytime that they are repairing or upgrading or adding new fence, it does need to be wildlife friendly.
Okay, thank you very much, Lindsay. So Martin, I see you're next, and I think we're gonna cut it off at that point unless there are folks online who have hands up, because we want to we have one more substantive topic before break and we want to get you a break. Martin.
I just want to build on the request for getting revenue information on these properties, which is great. But then also one thing you guys just talked about, the costs, the infrastructure. Now, if the lease is responsible for maintaining all the fences, the water infrastructure, road, that's one thing. But if the state land board has to pay those costs, has there ever been a situation where there's been analysis where it says, well, you know, it takes $2 million to invest to bring this up to what we need it to be. We're making $10,000 a year. This doesn't make sense to proceed to maintain this infrastructure. Does that come up ever?
Elliot, do you want to talk about that or you want me to talk about that?
This is Elliot Hoyt, Assistant Director of Sustainability and Working Lands. It's an excellent question. In particular, there are different sources of funds that we use to make improvements on property. And just as an example, one of them is investment and development funds, and we can put money into property to improve it. But we need to have some kind of return on that investment. It definitely, we consider the very long-term aspect of that. If it's something that's going to improve the value of the land over a long term and make it better, then that's something that the board will take into consideration in improving funds for that. But it is an excellent question that there are all kinds of things in this world that need money to make them better. And our board has a fiduciary responsibility to its beneficiaries. And so that does have to get balanced at some point. And so we look into it. We work very closely with our lessees. You're absolutely right that oftentimes we try to find ways for lessees, and frankly, particularly in the agriculture world, where lessees are able to apply for certain kinds of grants, equip and so forth, to do improvements on the property that we wouldn't be able to go after ourselves. And so we'll work together with them. We'll also do situations where we'll buy materials and then the lessee will contribute labor. So that's something where a lessee doesn't have to have money out of their pocket, but it gives us an opportunity to reduce a cost for a set of improvements on a property by partnering with a lessee in ways that they can contribute, and sweat equity in a sense. So there are a bunch of different ways that we try to achieve the goals that we need to in terms of the investments that are necessary to get the outcomes that we want for the long-term value of the property.
Thanks, Elliot. Okay, Nick, can I grab this? Mute for 1 second. Okay, so we're going to do a little agenda swap, because what we want to do is this is all kind of prelude in a way to this discussion on the recommendations and ideas you have for Stewardship Trust and the other two trusts we've discussed. But what we're going to do now is, before talking about the interim report and taking a break, we're going to actually front load this next discussion, which relates directly to the video that Nick recorded in December and sent out to you. And you all hopefully you've all seen that. We've resent it to you a couple times, but it's really capturing some like framework analysis that the State Land Board uses to help you all think about framing your recommendations. So it's intended to give you a bit of a framework, and it was really coming out directly of our December meeting. So we're going to ask Nick to talk about how the State Land Board does this, and then we're going to actually ask you all to have a little bit of discussion amongst yourselves about how this may be helpful to you, or what it brings up for you in terms of how it helps your recommendations. So we'll frame that question for you in a minute, but go ahead. Pass this to you. Back to you.
Back to me.
I wish I could clip it. You want to-
How's that? Sound okay? That's great, actually. Glad you thought of it. Yes, thanks. So as conversations have been happening and we've been putting information to you for consideration, there's this idea of a framework forming that we hopeful will be helpful to you as you start to build recommendations that ultimately get put to the State Board of Land Commissioners for consideration. Boy, I'm just off. So yeah, we mentioned the video that I recorded. Hopefully you got a chance to see that. And, you know, pretty straightforward. We've been measuring value largely in terms of revenue, but some of our stewardship concepts are also sort of a revenue factor. If we're not doing the things today, of course, that make the land healthier, more effective, and better over the long term, well, future revenues will be impacted. So it's sort of a shorthand for stewardship concepts as well. But as we present these things, they're falling into these buckets that feel like a framework that we're calling criteria, constraints, and pursuits. Hopefully, it's helpful to you as you start to formulate recommendations, and maybe it kickstarts the conversation around recommendation development. Our staff work really hard on accomplishing both stewardship and revenue on every piece of land. We understand that to be our directive. And so those concepts fit under these criteria, constraints, and pursuits framework as well. I suppose expanding them out a little bit, I think of the three components in this way. Criteria is sort of what are the rules under which State Land Board operates? What things are a given in the way that we do our work? What things are always true? What uses can we activate that result in value? Where do we invest for long-term value? Where do we have the opportunity to lean into complementary efforts or complementary work on a parcel? Constraints, what things are conditional but required and cause us to act in different ways depending on the situation? What things might detract from value? What are the impacts to various stakeholders of the decisions that we make? And then pursuits is that aspirational component. What aspirations do we have for the work that we do and for the properties that we care for? How much positive impact can we actually accomplish? We would love to maximize positive impact at every turn. What things can we do differently tomorrow compared to today to activate that value? So coming back to criteria, value, revenue, those are really easy concepts to anchor to, but I can't emphasize strongly enough that measurable positive impact that is created by our stewardship team every day, and really all of our staff in partnership with our lessees. We rely on our lessees to manage this gigantic portfolio of land, and so we make high expectations from those lessees. You see a couple different kind of prompting questions or prompting thoughts. The hope is that we help you sort of step into our shoes as we think about uses of trust lands, knowing that there are these factors that we want to build into every decision. So think about recommendations. It's not meant to be guardrails or to rein in any ideas. It's just to say, as practical concerns, there are things that we're going to have to wrestle with as we think about recommendations. Some of the questions that were submitted or some of the ideas that were submitted that we think kind of fit into that criteria bucket is, can we be more explicit in exactly how our staff are analyzing natural values? Can State Land Board do more to manage stewardship trust lands for long-term and option value? Actually, one of our callers mentioned those very concepts this morning, while recognizing that reasonable and consistent income is a factor of what we have to do. Someone submitted a question about, does revenue have to happen on every parcel? It's an interesting concept. So help us think differently about that or more about that. And lots of submissions so far have touched on the idea that there are more data sets that perhaps for you as individuals in your work or in your expertise help inform the decisions you're making. Maybe they can be layered into what the State Land Board is doing. We need help knowing what those are. We need help understanding how to apply them to the work that we're doing. And one of the things that I wanted to call forward is a thing that we're wrestling with is these definitions. In the report, we offered some idea of what the State Land Board thinks natural values are. We call out that even though we're directed to uphold and protect natural values, the Constitution and statute doesn't define those things for us. So we've had to make a staff determination and apply that over time and vet it through repetition and be consistent with it. But there's still the pieces of the bill that we need help understanding and defining, terms like conservation, stewardship, compatibility, regenerative ag, and low conflict recreation. We have opinions and practices about how each of those things fit into our portfolio. The thought is that you all have different and additive ideas to that as well. And so we're welcoming those ideas through this recommendations development process. Coming back to constraints, what are the things that are conditional but required? As I was thinking about this, I was thinking of like was it a snooker table that has the bumpers in it? Or bumper pool, depending on where you're from in the country. It's the buoys in the channel that you've got to navigate to make sure that you don't step into peril or that you don't inadvertently cause an impact that you don't want to cause. But under this bucket, some of the things that we have to consider in our work is statutory requirements like Colorado Revised Statute 36.1.118, which gives protections to agricultural operators on trust lands. We wrestle with local control. We don't wrestle with it, we embrace it. Local municipalities, jurisdictions, local regulators have rules that we abide by just like any other property owner does. And so when it comes to things like code and zoning, those are factors in what we have to work with in our work. So, we'll help you keep those in mind as you're forming recommendations. We build management action plans and strategic plans, not as with real intention. Forget the not as. We create those things with real intention, and we do our work to see those come to reality in everything that we're doing. And then thinking about some of the pieces of feedback that the group has already submitted that kind of fall under the bucket of constraints. Someone asked, what are the bottlenecks that State Land Board faces in implementing new or diversified uses? Well, these are some of them. Things like local control. How do you ensure state stewardship trust lands exclude non-compatible leases and permit only uses that protect and enhance natural values? That's a term that needs definition. What is not compatible? We have a practice now decades in the making that we assert show that there are uses of all trust lands and stewardship trust lands that are compatible with the natural values on those properties. And it happens by intention, not by accident. How is reasonable and consistent defined? We have our mandate for reasonable and consistent. We provided a lot of feedback on that question because, again, I think for me, it was helpful to think about the time before reasonable and consistent. There was a time of maximal revenue. And how do we move away from that? Well, we know what we don't want to do. So for a time, everything else is reasonable and consistent. And over time, with practice, we learn, nope, that's also not reasonable or consistent. Nope, neither is that. Nope, neither is that. Oh, here are some things that we're putting to work that do seem to be reasonable and certainly are consistent. But if there are other definitions to that that would be helpful to us at the State Land Board, we welcome that as well. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on that concept of pursuits, the aspirational things. We've got a whole bunch of businesses in our plan that we want to make more of. Carbon management, can we be a player in carbon sequestration, be it geological, biological, other sciences that pop up to help handle carbon in a particular way. Our ecosystem services business is thriving and growing, and it's been more than a decade of hard work to get us to leasing types that are generating significant revenue in small spaces. But we would love to do more. Wildlife stewardship. Suzanne mentioned, we've heard lots of comments come up that say, doesn't the land board or should the land board have an opportunity to step further into wildlife management? One of the things we talk about with the State Land Board is that we are a landscape scale operator. And so when you've got landscapes to manage and work with, what can you accomplish over dozens of square miles, hundreds of square miles, tens of thousands of acres? Today, we're going to go look at property, one of our properties that we're extremely proud of, that's 40 square miles on the urban-rural interface. And so where there are opportunities to do new and interesting things, can we pilot? Can we be an innovator in those spaces? We like to consider ourselves innovative. We think a lot of our practices are, and we want to be a leading force in that over time. Thinking about the concept of layered uses, layered leasing, I will throw out a pitch out there that sometimes in this group, we've used the word stacked leasing, and I don't know why that hits me wrong, but we like the term layered leasing. And so where are those places where layered leasing can not just be collaborative, but protective of each other? Again, we are not a giant staff. We're 50 people. So we do lean on our operators to take care of each other in some instances, and we'd love to find opportunities to do more of that, and we welcome ideas. So one of the concepts that the group has submitted through the FAQs process is the idea of what role should other Colorado state strategies play in shaping this work group's direction. But also I think that touches on State Land Board. We've given you an idea of how much we interact with CPW, perhaps with ECMC, DRMS, DWR. We embrace lots of pieces of lots of strategic plans that exist across the state. And to a degree, there are experts around this table and online that know some of those plans wonderfully and much stronger than we do. And so we welcome recommendations that feed into those plans as well, but know that we do have a good foundation in how to integrate those plans into our work. And that does happen with some regularity. but please say more where you can say more. So, personally, I have a hope that thinking about this framework, these three components, helps not only start to trigger ideas for recommendations, but is that it's additionally helpful in that it's one thing to say the state land board should consider doing more conservation. It's another piece to say the state land board might approach greater conservation efforts by doing X. It's that by doing X piece that I hope kind of starts to fit into this framework. What are the things we have to navigate? What are the things we're going to run into? And the state land board is more than willing to help continually vet and stress test recommendations against a framework of criteria, constraints, and pursuits, so that these recommendations coming out of this group are as strong as they can be. So stop talking for a moment.
Great.
You don't want to just lean in.
I could just lean in. So I see two questions, and I'm just going to highlight what I'm proposing we do, and you guys can see if you can hold your questions or want to ask them, or one question. So we do want to take a break, but first we want you to talk to each other for a minute about a question, which now we need to scooch over because Sam's writing it. So the question is, think about workgroup members, an issue that you've been thinking you would really like to see a recommendation on, just one as an example. And think about how this framework of criteria, constraints, pursuits might be helpful potentially in either one or both of two things. And this is going to be in the chat too for folks who are online. Helping you understand sort of the nature of that recommendation, just like thinking about it. And secondly, formulating the recommendation in useful ways, potentially along the lines of what Nick was just talking about. So that's the question for you all. Do you want to, Steve, ask your question first before we do this? And I'll just say mechanically, we're going to ask you to just turn to the two people next to you. So like groups of three. I think the work group folks online are 4 or 5, but you all stay together. The technical advisory members are welcome to be in the group. You all can just discuss it. And we'll mute you so you can't hear us. But first, let's hear your question, Steve.
Thanks. Just real quick, more of a comment than question, I think, but that was real helpful, Mark. I think it would be even more helpful, maybe not today, but maybe in a future meeting, to use this framework and maybe walk us through a hypothetical or two, or a real case example or two, showing how that framework was actually applied. I mean, I think you did a great job talking about it in more general terms, but seeing how staff actually apply that framework to a real world or a hypothetical real world situation would be, for at least me, would be very helpful.
Sure. Thanks for the suggestion. We'll work on that and get something to the group.
Okay. Fantastic. So, all right. So we're not going to be exact about this, but I know you talked to a couple people at the beginning of this meeting. It's fine if you're in the same groups, but ideally turn to the people on the other side. So you have a slightly different group configuration. You might need to move your chairs a little bit. We'll give you 10 minutes, I think, for this. So we're running a little late, and then we're going to take a break. So come back in 10 minutes. We'll ping you, and then we'll send you off. Okay? All right. Okay. So we're going to do a quick minute, just quick popcorn debrief of what you all just talked about. And so folks online, maybe we'll turn to you first and wonder if there's you want to give a quick 30-second something that stood out from your discussion, something that you heard. And I think you were facilitating that. I'm happy for you to call on someone or summarize anything yourself, but it'd be great to hear what you are talking about, even just a couple things.
Yeah, we covered quite a few topics, and just thinking through how with different examples kind of stack up or fit within, or maybe don't quite easily fit within the framework. So thinking about motorized recreation and just some of the constraints there, thinking about equity and how that's operationalized in terms of these criteria. Who are the beneficiaries of of some of these, approaches, who are sort of the winners and losers, who doesn't have access, thinking about like particular cases. So, affordable housing development and how that would fit within the framework and how that would be considered. So we covered quite a bit. I don't know if there's anything else to add online that folks just want to lift up as well, but those were some of the big standouts to me.
Thank you. No, it's great to just hear some of the tidbits. And Mark, I don't know if you want to share from your group, or if just one or two people want to share anything that stood out from your discussion about how this framework of criteria, constraints, pursuits could be helpful in formulating possible recommendations. And Mark, you were part of one discussion. I don't know if you want to share anything you heard or volunteer somebody.
No, we'll let people self-volunteer. Does anyone want to share what they had in their discussion?
So we were talking about, both Steve and I in particular had, one of the things we would love to see is ways that recreation can be allowed and on some of these lands, in particular, some of the stewardship lands, which might be some of the highest and best and most scenically valuable, and what would be the ways that that could be incorporated. Because right now, unless you're a hunter or an angler on some property that CPW has an engagement with, you don't have direct access with these lands. But then there are the issues of, what do the current lessees have in terms of their operations, and how would you have to wait until someone's lease is up for renewal to allow that? Or so we were kind of struggling a little bit about, like, well, contractually, if it's not in a lease now, wouldn't the state retain the ability to lease it if it's not impacting that, even on top of an existing one? That's where Martin was kind of bringing in his legal perspective to that.
Yeah.
I would say the other topic that just came up in our group, and maybe it did elsewhere, the question from the work group might be, are we supposed to be giving you big ideas and the state land board goes and figures out how to implement those, since the work group isn't necessarily experts? Or are we really asking for the most granular, specific, implementable recommendations as possible? So that's just something that I think is probably going to be in the air as we go forward.
It's a great thing to call out. I think that probably is in the air. Okay, this is really helpful. And I think we are going to take a break, but all of this is helpful for today's discussion and going forward. But is there anything else pressing that people want to share that feels useful from your discussion? Okay. So we are going to take a break and come back around 5 after. And the restrooms, again, are around the corner to the right. There's snacks in the back. There will be lunch at 12:20. And we will see everyone at around just after 5 after the hour. Okay. See you in a minute. All right, everybody. So we are going to proceed in our agenda. Thank you for your patience. Can you all hear online? RT, can you all hear? Oh, good. Wonderful. Thanks for your patience as we had to swap around a couple of agenda topics. And right now, what we want to do is go back to this draft interim report you saw. And Tim's pulling up the slides. Thank you. So I'm going to pass it to Erin Ray. All of these things are connected. So even though these are really discrete topics, they're all connected to today's discussion around stewardship trust recommendations. They're all connected to where we're going. And they're all intended to sort of keep doing this iterative educating of this group as we also think about the input you all have. So I guess I'm going to pass it to Erin in that spirit. And Nick actually to his whatever. Yeah.
Can folks hear me? Is that working? Awesome. Okay. Hello again. So, one of your first required actions is to submit an interim report. And Tim, if you can go to the next slide. You've seen this slide before, but the interim report is due March 16th, has to be submitted to those folks that you see on the slide. And there's actually very little information about what has to be in it, except for that last bullet, which is information on potential recommendations for the Stewardship Trust, the Internal Improvements Trust, and the Saline Trust. So last meeting, you saw an outline of what we as the planning team proposed to include in the interim report. A week or so ago, you got a first draft of that report, and you got it via email. It's in the back here. It's in your packets. And this is our first suggestion about what that interim report include. And so this is just a very high-level outline of what you see in there. The first section describes the legislative mandate of the group. Second section describes the work group's approach to fulfilling that mandate. The third section describes sort of the decision-making context in which your recommendations will ultimately sit. And then the fourth section identifies what we called emerging themes and information on potential recommendations related to these three trusts. What we tried to capture was the kinds of things that have come up in conversation, the things that sort of represent the interests and values and perspectives that we've heard from work group members. Notably, what is not included here are final recommendations of the work group. And that was intentional. We wanted to have this interim report be essentially a progress report. Here's what we've done so far, and here's what we're looking forward to doing. Here are the kinds of things we want to explore. But in drafting this, we tried to preserve as much flexibility for you to work through recommendations that would ultimately be included in the final report. You're going to have a lot of that conversation today, and started before the break, in terms of what kinds of things would you like to put forward around the three trusts. But as a planning team, I'll speak for myself, I didn't feel comfortable sort of pushing you to be in a place where today you were ready to adopt final recommendations related to these three trusts. My read of the work group is I didn't feel like we were in a place where we were going to be able to do that today. So what we've said in the report is, here's what we're considering, and we will come back to you with final recommendations in the final report. That gives you all the time to work through recommendations on the three trusts, recommendations on the rest of the things that are required of you in the final report. So that's what's here. I want to show you the next slide, and then I'm going to stop. And what I mostly want to hear is your feedback. Maybe one more, Tim, sorry. Just looking ahead, and then we'll come back to your feedback. What we proposed as the schedule is today we're getting your feedback on the report. If you have additional feedback that you want to provide in writing, that could be track changes in the version you've seen. It could be, a summary of your thoughts, sort of whatever you want to do. We're asking for that by next week, the 4th. So we'll take what we hear from you today, take any written feedback you want to provide. We will revise the report based on that feedback. We will share back with you a revised version of the report on the 24th. So you'll be able to see what was changed. We are also going to share with you a summary of any of the substantive feedback that we received in writing, right? You're obviously going to hear each other's feedback this morning, but if one work group member sends us written feedback by email, for the purposes of open meetings and for your benefit, we want you to have access to that feedback. So if someone sends us written feedback that says you forgot to capitalize something, we'll capitalize it and we'll be done. But if there's substantive feedback that we get from you, we're going to summarize that and share it with the entire group so that everyone can see that substantive feedback. My goal is that version that you get on the 24th is as close to final as we can get it. My hope is that we can address all of your feedback, address all your concerns, send back to you a version on the 24th that's as close to final as we can get it. You'll have one more opportunity after the 24th to provide any final comments. And again, my hope is at that point, they should be pretty high level if you have them, because hopefully we've already addressed your concerns. But we'll give you another chance to share any additional feedback. In the meeting on the 5th, what I want to do is present you with a final report that reflects your feedback, that has addressed your concerns, that everyone is comfortable with. In the meeting on the 5th, you say, hey, Aaron, that's the best report we've ever seen. Great job. And then we're done. We then submit it to the folks we have to submit it to by the 16th. So what I'm going to ask of you is, if you can get us feedback as early in this process as possible, that's ideal. Please try not to wait until the 5th to share major feedback and concerns. If things come up, they come up. It's your report. We'll address them. But the earlier you provide feedback today and by the 4th, the better the process works for everyone. So that's what the process that I'm proposing looks like. Questions about the process, and then I want to open it up for your thoughts. Yeah, Aaron.
You need a microphone. Hang on. Sorry.
Thank you. So I'm hesitant to ask because I don't know if I feel strongly either way, but is the idea that the report will include all recommendations, or are we proposing, or should we propose some process to prioritize and vote on different things? Because I mean, I think both are valuable, and I don't know if we frankly have time to do the latter. Maybe that's something we'd consider for the final report. But is that the idea, that it is a collection of all feedback without kind of a collation and support up or down?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I'm going to maybe answer that in two ways. My recommendation to you for the interim report is that we do not include specific recommendations at all, that this is a progress report, and that we put all those recommendations in the final report. When we get to the final report, that's a very good question. And that's something that I think we'll obviously sort of bring to you. And what we've said is we will seek consensus where we can find it. And so if there are recommendations we get a consensus on, great. And we will capture viewpoints that don't represent a consensus as well. And so I could imagine a set of consensus recommendations and then other recommendations that didn't receive a consensus. We can figure that out. And I think that'll ultimately be a question for you. But my recommendation is we do that in the final report, and that this report primarily sort of capture the progress you've made to date. But if folks have thoughts on Aaron's suggestion or other feedback?
Yeah, and I will say that anything that doesn't feel pressing, what we would like to do right now is get to the discussion on possible recommendations. So I would love to capture your feedback that's substantive and anything that feels pressing, and then not do more at this point, just because I want to get to the meat of the discussion today. But any other comments or questions? Steve, did you have a quick?
Want initial feedback now then, or no?
Any initial feedback, and especially just quickly, and then we'll get it from you in writing after the meeting too.
Well, first of all, I think you guys did a great job. Thank you so much. Hard job to do, considering that we're so early in this process, and yet you had to come up with a pretty detailed progress report. And Aaron, the way you put it earlier was you did view this as a progress report. I think it succeeds beautifully in that regard. I think if there's a weakness to it, the second bullet, what is missing, the last, part 4, the recommendations, but you knew that, we all knew that all along, right? That there was going to have to be a little bit of bluffing our way through that at this point, because I don't think we've had an opportunity as a group yet to really develop much in the way of, recommendations. So, but I think, with the time we have left before there's an opportunity, before the deadline of submitting it, that would be my recommendation for where we might look for an opportunity to just beef it up a little bit more, and maybe focus our discussion today. Because I think there's only 2 or 3 paragraphs on that at the very end, like page 17 or 18 or something like that. And I think it'll be hard, but I think if there was one area to focus on, it might be that. And also, I guess, do you have any sense about like how this is even going to be used by the legislature? I'm a little cynical on that, and I presume that there might not be that much attention paid to this report. But maybe if you have more insight on that, maybe there's a staffer for a particular legislator who really will review this and be giving feedback. If you have any thoughts on that, you can share. That might be helpful.
Appreciate that, Steve. I'll be very quick because I really want to hear from you. To your last point, the legislature is one audience. The governor, the executive director of DNR, state land board are also audiences. I know we are very excited to see the recommendations and think about how they get incorporated. And, State Land Board is required to consider your recommendations. How the legislature uses them, we'll see. I would think that the most useful thing will be the final report, because it'll have, all of your recommendations, and that timing wise would then lean into a 2027 legislative session, if that's how someone wants to view it.
Hey, everyone. So I'll address that, I think, part first on the legislature part. So Matt and I, we were just chatting about this a second ago too. We were both in the room when the bill was written. And I'll say that the sponsors of this bill are going to want to have a hearing on it. And so the final draft is where I think that that'll come from. My guess would be that it'll be potentially two-part. You may have one in the Water Resources and Agricultural Review Committee sometime in the fall to have an initial discussion, which is a group that contains both the House Agriculture and the members from the House Agriculture and the Senate Agriculture committees, as well as other people. So like this last year, the speaker was on there. And that during the 27 session, they'll likely have a hearing. Well, they'll invite DNR, the State Land Board, and members of this work group to actually participate in a hearing on our recommendations. That's what's happened with other ones before. If I think about, like, particularly the Drought Task Force, which I'm looking at Aaron, he was on. So that's one piece. Just wanted to give a little insight onto that. That they'll review it. They'll have a hearing. They'll want to they'll ask a lot of questions, particularly if you've met Senator Roberts before. He asks a lot of questions, a lot of really good questions. And so he was one of the sponsors of this bill. So the other piece on the initial feedback and what's missing, I know that this is not the final recommendations, and we're not getting there yet, and there'll definitely be a lot more discussion between now and then. But there's especially when I look at part 4, and it talks about like requirements and things along those lines, particularly when we talk about like what are some of the statute requirements that you all that we all have to adhere to. I'll say I think there's I do represent ag, but it's blatantly missing from this part. And if you look at the statute, and I know because I helped get them put in, there are some lines that say, and I'm quoting from the statute itself, that one of the pieces that we have to look at, we look at the enhancing the natural beauty, of working lands, recreational opportunities, things along those lines, and then usually right underneath those, which I think throughout this entire process, it's like we've just focused on recreation, conservation, and things along those lines. And we keep missing that piece that's literally directly underneath, which it says promote long-term productivity for agriculture. So if that can be layered in here, I think that'd be really nice. I do want to just point out, and I told my group earlier, that this is, I think, going to become even more part of the conversation and ag on these lands, making sure that we don't lose the ability to use them as leases. And there was a report just released by USDA within the past few weeks that shows that Colorado, from 2017 to 2022, which is what the report released, has lost more agricultural land than any other state in the country. And so if we are looking at how we're doing this, we have to look at promoting this long-term productivity for agriculture. And so that's just one of the pieces that I want to make sure that we do have addressed in the report.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. To your first point, we're planning for those kinds of hearings as well. So thank you for sharing that with the group. And to your second point, that's exactly the kind of feedback that we want. So if there are things that are missing, if there are things that you think we didn't appropriately address, like we have your oral comment, but written comments as well. Like tell us what we're missing and where to put it. That's exactly what we're looking for. So thank you.
And yes, totally, to catching those things in the report, and just know that it is very much on the radar in terms of the process, and will be, certainly a part of the next meeting as well. Okay, we want to hear from Stacy Coleman, and do we have also Regina available? No. Okay, so what we want to do right now is, you all remember that a piece of this is soliciting input on how to improve the state land board's engagement of and notification with public stakeholders and also tribal nations. And so, Stacy, do you want to give us a status update on, and Aaron, I don't know, between the two of you, are you doing this together, on how we're doing that and what the proposal is? Whichever. Yeah, come on up. You can reintroduce yourself, people. Oh, that sounds good. Do you want me to pin this on? Maybe. You hold. I've had a long call. Good.
Okay, awesome. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stacy Coleman. I'm the Assistant Director for Tribal Affairs for the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. And as Ryan was mentioning, and I know Nick presented this again as a reminder, one of the directives here for the work group to consider is how to improve public engagement of stakeholders, including tribal nations, in the consultation and notification process used for new leases or the use of long-term stewardship trust parcels. So first, with that specific directive, I did want to make the distinction that tribal nations are not stakeholders. They are inherently sovereign entities. And so they have lots of different ways that they are approached through the, Constitution, lots of different treaty rights, as well as, legal status within the federal government there. So we need to ensure that we're properly engaging with those entities through that sovereign status that they hold. And with that being said, what we've been doing is we were able to, a reminder, we have two particular work group members that are representing two different tribal nations on this particular work group, the Southern Ute Indian Tribe, and that's Council Member Linda Baker, and the Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, which is Regina Lopez White Skunk. And we've been able to talk to Regina and keep Councilmember Baker updated too, but as part of this and questions have come up from work group members that have been submitted to the consultant team on tribal consultation and trying to be able to develop specific recommendations surrounding this directive there. So we're gathering those, and really, what we're hoping and proposing to do, as we've talked with our work group members related to this, is really, offer to the councils, tribal councils, Southern Ute, Ute Mountain Ute, to be able to brief them on the work group mandate and other pieces involved with this. So that would be an invitation that I would work with our work group members to officially send out to the tribal councils there. It would also include the natural resources staff and other staff that typically work on state land board issues for the for each of the respective tribal nations there. So that's one step that we would propose doing. And within that invitation, we would also like to provide tribal leadership the opportunity, or their staff the opportunity, to attend a work group meeting and actually, be able to provide some of the information and their perspectives directly too. Now, again, we have two work group members that have been appointed to be those designated representatives, but it's also a way just to ensure that, understanding that not everyone may have the same sort of experiences so far in being able to work with tribal nations, and every single tribal nation is distinct. So, it's really important that we don't accidentally, say, this is what all tribal nations think, because everyone has a distinct opinion, and it's important for you to hear that as well. And so that will be another component of that invite that we provide as well. Really, our goal is just for you to have the opportunity to learn, meet, and really understand better tribal nation priorities and interests in this particular area that the work group is focusing on, but also get some background into these larger relations that the state has on a regular basis with tribal governments as we do our work. Another component of this that I wanted to just make sure and get an update on is that we do have a work group member seat for a member of the American Indian community that has not been filled yet. We've received that particular process is led by the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs, which you may hear me refer to as CCIA, but that hasn't been filled yet. We do have some more applicants that they are setting up everything to review on. It's a whole process that they have to go through in terms of doing interviews and then providing 10-day notice for public, open meetings purposes, getting a special session issued for the Colorado Commission of Indian Affairs to meet and then discuss and vote on that particular applicant. So they are working on that. We're hoping that maybe that process will be completed by mid to late February, but I can't guarantee that. But I want to mention that too, because there are over 200,000 Colorado residents that self-identify as Native American. And, they're our neighbors, they're our family members, the people we work with. And all these lands being ancestral lands, including public lands, it's important to get the perspective of not only the tribal nations that have current and historical associations with Colorado, but also the perspectives of community members. So that is something that we want to ensure that position gets filled at a time that they can still meaningfully participate in this work group, but also that we're aware of those perspectives that really need to be included here and at the table as well. So that's a bit of an update there. And on top of that, just as we were moving forward, since we've been talking about interim reports and final reports and everything else, our goal is also to be able to provide both of the tribes enough time to be able to review the final draft report and provide any input that they would like to see there as well. So that'll be built into our process piece that I know we are short on time on for such a large group to be able to do such significant work, but that will be included there too. And one more piece is, if you aren't aware of yet, the Colorado Outdoor Strategy, it's an initiative that was released this past April at the Partners in the Outdoors Conference. I know some folks are familiar with it. Some may have referenced it in our group discussions here before. But that piece also has an important component to it as well. It's the guidance framework for tribal collaboration. And it's not for the faint of heart. It is almost 80 pages. So we put a lot of work into that particular guidance framework. And that's just one piece of giving folks a preview as to some of these, just a background on not only the two tribes that have jurisdiction here in Colorado at this time, but also the larger history and continued relationship that tribal nations have to Colorado. And in addition to that, the greater community. So I would recommend, it's something you can find online, and we'll make sure to figure out a way to get it to you as well more formally so that you have it. But it's a good read, and it's a good read if you aren't familiar with tribal relations and some of the things that we're trying to do across partnerships just like this to ensure that we're better connecting, collaborating, and also conducting formal consultation as a state entity with tribal nations and the greater community on these issues. So I will pause and take any questions that you have in the meantime. Great, I got off easy, thank you. Oh, yep.
And this was a preview, and this is gonna be on a longer agenda in a couple of meetings, but because there has to be some outreach in the meantime. But Stacy, thank you so much for helping shepherd this part of the process in the way it needs to be shepherded and connecting it with outdoor strategy and other guidance for tribal engagement that has been developed with tribal participation and leadership. It's really important. We want to be connecting the dots. Okay, so we are now in the part of the meeting where you get out your phones because we're going to do a polling exercise, and some of you have done this before with Mentimeter or other polling exercises. So does anyone not have a phone or a computer? Because you can do this with either a phone or a computer. This is an exercise we're going to do with just work group members. Everybody else is going to be sort of observing in listening role. So is everyone on the Wi-Fi who has, make sure you're on the Wi-Fi. It's Aurora Guest. There's no password. And if you have a concern, if you can't get on a computer or a phone on Wi-Fi, raise your hand and we'll figure out a workaround. So while you're doing that, I'm just going to explain the purpose of this last part, this next sort of 40 minutes of our discussion. We have a number of recommendation ideas that have percolated around the Stewardship Trust, the Saline and Internal Improvement Trusts over the particularly last meeting. You've seen all of these because we gave you both in the interim report a summary of those themes that we'd heard from you so far in that last section, and also in the recommendation sort of synthesis that we sent out maybe yesterday. It pulled from actual Google form submissions from you that we also shared back with you since the last meeting. So we've gathered some ideas and we've tried to group them to basically take your temperature on how are these things sounding to you. We don't want to get into wordsmithing yet because we're going to keep iterating. And we also don't want to get people too sort of attached to specific ideas yet, because we want to first gauge, are we in the right ballpark? Are you all sort of, are we catching, do we have the right parameters? Do we have the right sort of sideboards? And are we in the right, you know, are we catching the things that are important to you regarding these trusts? So Sam is going to walk us through how we're going to do this exercise, but that's the purpose. We're not trying to come out of the next 40 minutes with like exact recommendations, but we're getting closer. And then we will be iterating on this discussion and coming back to you with actual language about how do these recommendations look? Do they look like what we talked about? So everyone should, in addition to being online and having your phone, you should have that worksheet, that recommendation handout, sorry, not worksheet. And if anyone doesn't have it, raise your hand. It was available as you walked in the door. And for folks online, it was shared with you yesterday. Okay.
Okay, great. So if everybody has it, that's kind of going to be our reference point throughout the polling exercise. Tim, if you want to go to the next slide, I think is what it will. So actually, this is Mark. Let's go. Yeah, so this will be the QR code that you will scan, and or you can go to menti.com and there's a code, but I think the QR code will be the easiest for you. I'm going to turn to Mark first to go through the ideas. So don't start yet, but Mark is going to go through the ideas first. You want that one?
Okay, so if everyone has their sheet out in front of them, I just want to remind everyone that this is coming from you. We've heard a lot from you already. So this has been an effort both in the interim report and then Sam really incorporating from the Google submissions and trying to organize them into a series of themes and buckets that we think we're hearing from you might be the places to turn into recommendations. Okay. So if we just go through them really quickly, the first one is really about the Saline and Internal Improvements Trusts. Are the lands that are in those trusts in the right beneficiaries' hands right now? Are they being used in a way that maximizes the benefits for recreation and conservation purposes? So that's the first kind of theme and bucket that is going to turn into a recommendation here at some point. The second one is about the focus of the process. It's a focus on the process and the criteria for how the state stewardship trust lands are evaluated, right? So are the definitions correct? Do we have the right transparency for people to know how decisions are made? Does the process or the criteria need to be improved? So a whole set of recommendations potentially around that. The third one is about values, and specifically, how do we define reasonable and consistent? How are we evaluating stewardship value over time and long-term value, right? The option value of these lands. The fourth one is about some of the leasing tools that the State Land Board has available to them. So for example, they can put lease stipulations on leases in the Stewardship Trust. Are those transparent? Do you have a sense of if they're working or not? How can we use non-perpetual leases, right? The fifth one is tribal notification and engagement, which we just heard about from Stacy. The sixth one is about parcel ID. So we want some recommendations about the purpose of a review, the data needs that we might have to evaluate parcels. Do we have the right tools? Do we have the right process in place to make recommendations or to take the recommendations that you're getting from other entities like the counties and the recreation folks? And then the last one is really about these pursuits, right? That framework we talked about. How well is the State Land Board engaging with other state priorities, other state plans? And do we want to form some recommendations around those? So that's just a really quick walkthrough of the way that we've thought about putting these into themes. So your task is to help us figure out, are these the right themes? And we will go away with the feedback that we have today from this discussion. We're going to write some recommendations and bring them back to you for final discussion and approval.
Okay, so before we start, just to kind of give you a sense of the flow of the poll, for each of the sort of buckets of ideas that Mark just provided an overview of, we're going to ask a set of questions. The first one is really a temp check, high level, like, is this something that you might support in principle? And so that's going to be consistent across all of the buckets. And it is really to give us an idea. It's like, are there any people who are really strongly opposed, and that's worth discussion? The second question is really around guardrails, gaps, questions that you all still have. That's an open-ended question for most of these. Like, is there anything that we need to be flagging? And sorry, that's the third question. What nuance or refinements would you suggest? And before that, we want you to flag any specific salient ideas that you want the group to further explore. So within that, and you can refer to the recommendation synthesis document, is there anything that you want to explore further? I will say, so for that, you don't have to type the ideas that are already in the recommendation synthesis. We have a staff member who's going to write that, because for each of the buckets of ideas, there's specific ideas. You all don't need to write those specific ideas, but we will ask for those buckets for you to kind of upvote the ideas that you want to explore. So after you say, here are the ideas that I want, in addition to the ones that are already on the worksheet or on the synthesis doc, we'll ask you to say, okay, this one, yes, and click on that. And it calls it voting. It's not really voting. It's just kind of understanding where there's some traction. So I think that's it, unless anybody has any questions around kind of the purpose or the structure of that. Yeah, Aaron.
I'll let you. Okay, so we have a QR code bottleneck.
I can like the QR code.
How do you like the QR code? Okay, so that's being troubleshot at the moment.
Tim, if you want to take.
Okay, so RT in the chat, is that where we're sharing it? Okay, while this happens, I just want to say a couple of things before we get the code up that you can use. When Sam was saying it's going to ask you, like, on a scale from 1 to 5, how supportive are you of this idea? I mean, those ideas are really high level. We're assuming that everyone's pretty supportive of, yeah, the right parcel should be in the right trust for the right beneficiary. Yeah, we do think that there should be interagency coordination, right? So we're assuming that there's going to be general support. If you feel like this is a red herring, or this is a problem, or this is, why are we talking about this? Like, feel free to no, yeah, I'm not fully supportive necessarily, right? So that's the temperature check part, if that makes sense. Are we getting closer?
So if you're scanning this QR code, which for some reason is not working, if you could go to menti.com and then type in the code, and I can read it out loud to you all so you have it, and I'll say it while you type it. Menti.com 3601-6708.
Here, say it again.
3601-6708. So I'm going to ask, RT is going to go to the next slide, and that should take you to the next question. Hey, there we go. That's great. Okay, so it's following along with you, which is wonderful. All right, so the next slide is going to be around, so just as a reminder, these are just proposed recommendations. They're not proposed recommendations, but really just high-level ideas. Okay, next slide.
Okay, can we pause for a second, make sure, is anyone lost? Is everyone with us? Okay.
Looks like we are good to go. We have 34 people, which is more than the work group members, but I'm going to hope that it's really just the work group members that are going to respond.
So if you're not, please don't respond to the poll because it will confuse things.
Okay. Yep. So this is just the overview of what the recommendation is. It's just so you know what we're talking about. So we're talking about bucket number 1, the trust beneficiary fit. So next slide, please, RT. Okay, so here's where you should be able to slide the bar from strongly opposed to strongly supportive around how you feel about a recommendation along the lines in principle.
And can we say too that you're going to see responses and we're going to keep moving us along and then we're going to, is that what we're doing? We're talking about as we come.
No. We're going to keep moving through the poll and then we'll come back at the end to discuss. So we're not going to be pausing for discussion throughout.
I'll also just note, Ryan and Sam, that you can see the number of responses on the screen.
Yep.
So let me know when to move. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we'll try and get critical mass here. And you can see as RT sort of goes over where people are at, how many people have said how many. So we have quite a few who are strongly supportive. We have one who's at a 2, a couple who are at 4, and 5 who are at 4, if that makes sense. Okay, we have 17 out of 37. We have 24 work group members. I'm going to give it just maybe one more second. Okay. All right, I think we should move on. So 18 people, you can see kind of where we sit there. So here's open-ended, really getting your sense of if there's any specific ideas that you'd like to explore. And again, you don't have to type up the ones that are already in the synthesis document, but if there's anything else that you want to explore.
So I think Kelly's on this call on the Zoom, right? So, okay. So Kelly, in a minute, you're going to see the bullets that are on page 1 of your handout under the trust beneficiary fit. You're going to see those pop up and you're allowed to sort of upvote, thumbs up the ones that you think are important once they pop up.
Once we go to the next slide.
Oh yeah, on the next slide. And so this is just if there's other things, if there's specific things that you don't think are called out in these bullets, this is where you put them. We remind people to come back to discuss these.
Yep. Just noting that I'm still seeing people working. Let's maybe take 10 more seconds here and then we'll move on. And as people are entering ideas, feel free to kind of digest some of the information that's up here. I'm not going to read it out loud, but yeah.
Can people see it from the back of the room? Lloyd, Martin, Tyler, you guys can see it? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Big thumbs down if you're still in the middle of writing something that you want to make sure is captured. All right. I think we're going to move on to the next one then. So this is where if you are able to kind of click on the ideas that really resonate that you want to make sure that we explore further, that and just note that we have entered the ideas that are in the worksheet as well. So if you want to find those, feel free to click on those. And you have up to, I think, 5. Still bucket 1. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you say that loud, Tim?
You have sort of 5 upvotes that you can use here. You don't have to do all 5, but up to. Okay. All right. We are gonna, 2 people have voted, so I think we are gonna move on here, knowing that it might not be complete, but move on just to see where we're at. So RT, if you want to finish. Great. So you'll see we have re-examining wildlife areas and parks for targeted swaps has the most sort of upvotes. Yeah, I know. We are rushed.
No, let's just not do voting.
Okay. Not going to do that?
We'll do that later.
Okay.
I think we just skip that for all of them.
Yeah, it just takes a lot of time, and I know we're running up against our time. Okay, we're going to move to bucket number 2 then. So apologies. Questions, still bucket number 1. Any questions that would need to be answered or any additional nuance that you suggest to make you feel comfortable with supporting an idea like this? So if you are closer to the 1 or 2, is there anything that you need to feel like is answered in order to get you closer to supporting this idea?
It totally is. I'm wondering, just process-wise, if we follow up after the meeting with an opportunity for people to have to actually look through all the ideas and indicate the ones that they're especially excited about. The idea is today's not the only time we have to do this, but we want to get a sense of like where people are most excited about for you all, so that you can say in the end, yeah, let's include all of them that have come up unless there's a real concern, but let's for sure emphasize the ones that have the most enthusiasm. Go ahead. This would be, how about this, but though, Tyler, I think this question that's up on the screen right now, what concerns, what questions, can you put those things here? Yeah, exactly. So afterwards. So can we do that as a follow-up?
Yeah, I think we can do a follow-up on all the ideas that are offered and give an opportunity similar to this after the meeting. Does that sound like it could be a good way to forward, given our time constraints today? Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think we can figure out a way to do that after the meeting. Yeah. Right. Yep. And I think we can just try and get through some of the substantive things here in the meeting, so you all have a chance. Yep. Nick. The online folks can't hear us?
They can't hear us.
Oh, they can't hear the questions. So just to summarize, we will be sending some sort of poll after the meeting to capture the upvotes and potentially the downvotes for ideas that are offered here after the meeting, because we just don't have the time right now to be doing that. Yes. And the reasons why, if there's a downvote. Yep. Okay. So thank you for that feedback. So let's move on with this question around, any additional nuance. Oh, we didn't get quite the chance. So let's give maybe just a couple more seconds on that. Questions that need to be answered. or sideboards.
So this is, for example, like if you think it's really important that the, that parks and wildlife are designated for all the reasons we've discussed, but you have this one condition that feels really important to you, for example.
This is still bucket one of ideas. Okay, sounds like we're kind of reaching a lull. So let's move on to bucket number 2 of ideas. Oh, great. Okay. Okay, and this whole next section of questions is around the decision criteria, providing clear expectations for how stewardship trust lands are evaluated and managed to protect and enhance natural values. Okay, next slide. Similar question to the first one, sort of on a scale. Okay, we got kind of a range going here. All right, we're going to move on to the next one. So similar, any specific ideas other than the ones that are listed in the synthesis document that you want to call out that you'd like to explore further? The other idea starts on page 2. Yeah, great ideas. If you could give me a wave if you're still typing an idea up that you want to be included. Okay, great. Yeah. The one that said just answered, review and discuss criteria fit for removal. Is that what that is? Maybe it's someone online. I don't know. Okay, I'm seeing more eyes meet mine, so I think we'll move on to the next question. And this, we're going to skip that. So any questions that need to be answered, nuance or conditions that you'd want in place for you to feel comfortable?
I saw a lot of just the importance of definitions. And so I think that this is one of the things that looks really clear. And I think as we go through, just go.
Okay. Yep. For example, defining long-term. Natural value. Conservation. Mm-hmm. Defining priorities within natural values, if any. Income on stewardship trust parcels compared to non-stewardship parcels. Compatibility with what? Yesterday, today, tomorrow? Okay. Anybody that's still sort of mid sentence? Okay. I'm gonna give you a couple more seconds. All right. Let's move on to the third bucket. Yep, great. And this is, again, clarifying how different aspects of value, including revenue, long-term value, and option value, are defined, weighed, and applied over time in stewardship trust decision-making. So next slide. Similar question, kind of gauging where you're at. Okay, we have quite a few at strongly supportive, a couple at 4 of 5, a couple at 2, and 1 at strongly opposed. All right, I think we're going to go to the next question. Similar salient specific ideas that you'd like to explore that are not listed in the synthesis document for this bucket of ideas. Providing clear operational definitions of reasonable and consistent revenue, how that standard might vary across the trusts. Okay, great. The value of promoting long-term productivity of ag. How does the values framework align with the decision criteria? How does the constitutional revenue mandate, how is interpreted and applied alongside long-term and option value? Recognize that annual monetization is not always required. Yep, that's on the worksheet. Long-term value for what purpose? Ag, recreation, scenic value. Okay, these are great. Well, I guess wave hands if you are in the midst. Okay, we're going to move on to the next. I'm not going to skip that one, skip the voting. And okay, concerns, questions, or even examples that you want to address to better understand how long-term or option value could be applied in practice. This one is a little bit different in its framing, but similar around guardrails or things that you need to understand.
Can I say something about it? I think there's at least one of you who had real concerns about this whole notion of clarifying different aspects of value, including revenue balancing. And so if you did, please put in here in this part why you were concerned. Does anyone want to share verbally if you're having? I think it's important if anyone had concerns about a framework that we.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how does State Land Board take advantage of opportunities that there's a short window for them? National capital accounting, cumulative impacts, tension between short-term income over long-term sustainability. Examples for how values are prioritized in practice. Clear definition of option value, how it fits within existing leases. Educational value, should it be included? I was like, I don't know what National capital. If someone wrote national capital accounting, is that what you meant, or was there something else that you meant? Is it national capital? Okay. She meant national capital. Oh, natural capital. Okay. That's what we were thinking. Okay. For those online, it's natural capital accounting. So if you're going to be synthesizing these recommendations, make note. Okay. I think wave if you are in the midst. Okay. Next slide. Okay, this is the fourth bucket, which is around leasing tools. So using lease tools more intentionally to advance stewardship outcomes. Next question. Gauging where you're at, temp check. Okay. Seeing quite a few at strongly supportive, also sort of the same around the middle, and one at strongly opposed. All right, we're going to move on. I think we're getting... okay, any specific ideas that you want to explore that are not captured in the synthesis document, which is at the bottom of page 3. Okay. Can you give me a wave if you're still typing? Okay. Yeah. Lloyd, are you good? Okay. Steve, are you close? Cool. Okay, great. Next slide. We're not going to vote, so we're going to move on. All right. Where do you see the greatest need for clarity or examples related to conservation, agricultural, or layered leases? Where do you need more clarity or examples? We're going to see it this afternoon. Where is there current transparency on this? When segmenting a parcel for different uses, are there barriers to conservation leasing or just lack of clarity and understanding from the public? Provide examples of layered leases with ag. Curious about other types of leases, such as rec leases, construct of conservation, the construct of conservation leasing. How does it actually work? Does it make sense? More examples. Great. Anybody still working? Okay. Perfect. Okay, next slide, RT. All right. You will note we are skipping the tribal engagement piece just because they are going to be providing recommendations, so we're not pulling you on that at the moment. So we're skipping to number 6, which is parcel identification. So identify and prioritize parcels with unrealized conservation and recreation potential. next slide. Getting your temp check. Okay, we kind of have the whole gamut here. A couple strongly supportive, a couple strongly opposed, or at 2, and a bunch in the middle. Okay, great. Next slide. Again, any ideas that aren't captured in the synthesis document that you want to make sure are included? Okay, in addition to the ones there, it's discuss the use of codex mapping tools in context, the purpose of specific parcel reviews. I'm not seeing a lot of folks looking at their phone. So is there anybody that's, just give me a wave if you're still typing? Okay. Good, Matt? Okay. We're going to move on to the next question, which is, are there criteria, data, or triggers that you'd want to see used to focus the parcel reviews in a practical and realistic ways?
And we know that there's a number of mapping tools on many of your radar. We're going to be getting into these as we go into the March discussion. So feel free to note those here as well.
What is normal? Land use change over time in a given landscape. Would like to see maps. Are there data gaps, baselines, cultural, et cetera, that would make this more effective, including social science evaluations? All right, give me a wave if you're still working. Okay, didn't see a wave, so I'm going to go move on. This is the last bucket. We're almost there. So this is the bucket around interagency coordination. So strengthening interagency coordination, for example, between State Land Board and CPW to ensure stewardship, habitat, and access decisions are informed by the best available expertise and aligned incentives. It's a mouthful. Okay. Okay, great. We are getting kind of, again, a range. We don't have anybody strongly opposed. We have a couple people in the middle. Let's move along. Again, any salient specific ideas you want to explore here? The specific comments around CPW integrating their habitat expertise and potentially the conflict between their practices with land management decisions of State Land Board. Most leases solicit input from CPW already. Outreach to county open space programs, regional partnerships as well. And then recognizing that a lot of state plans could fit within this recommendation. Anybody else still typing want to include it? Okay, we're going to move along then. Okay, where do you see the greatest opportunity for improved coordination to add value in practice? Specifically, is there an opportunity here? Opportunities around involving regional partnerships, more detail on the current coordination, earlier communication and analysis by CPW in reviewing state trust parcel usage and impacts, habitat improvement plans for stewardship trust parcels led by CPW, sharing disparate knowledge to better manage lands, improved communication with economic development agencies could be explored, and recognition by other agencies like CPW, ECMC of the role and management decisions and preferences of State Land Board. And then more frequent public presentations to other state agencies and boards. Anybody else still working? Okay, that was a lot to ask, and thank you for both your perseverance, your knowledge, and your intent to try and get this through in our speedy process.
I think the thing that one takeaway is that, so we were really hoping at this point to go back into each one and to call out some like takeaways from each of these and a sense of where people are really, struggling with ideas or coalescing around ideas. And I think what's going to have to happen at this point, just because in the interest of time, is that we're going to go back, we're going to look at these on the back end. We're going to put them together. All of this will be shared back with you as part of the meeting summary, but we're also going to craft a follow-up with you all so that you can get a reflection of here are all the things that we were saying and an opportunity to really give some feedback on here's what I feel strongest about, here's what I'm most concerned about. But this at least was a snapshot. I think that was some of the benefit of that exercise is we get a snapshot and a temperature check. And the downside, obviously, is we don't have the benefit of sort of the cross discussion. So I think we're going to do some thinking about how to do that on the backside. But first of all, do any of you, I think, have takeaways from what you just saw, just high level, in terms of anything that stood out to you? And or do you have strong suggestions about follow-up other than generally that you have an opportunity to weigh in and the ways that we talked about? I don't see any hands up. Do you? Oh, sorry, Aaron. And I don't see, we have one in the room. Any online, feel free to put your virtual hands up too.
This might just come out in the way the first question was kind of, do you support, how do you feel about the theme? The themes are pretty broad as I think is intended. So there were a couple places where I would have voted in the middle because some of them I thought were 5 and some of them I thought were a 2. So as long as that's, I don't want to split further, but just being clear that some of these in my mind are they cover a lot. And I don't know how we're going to parse that, but it might be important as we move forward.
Yeah, I think just going back to the first comment, and it was just cemented, I think, Aaron, by you and some nodding heads, is that we're not going to put a ton of stock in like how supportive people were necessarily of the idea of like, yeah, we should define terms better, you know. But I think where we imagine you all as work group members are going to be really interested is, you know, when people said, yeah, we should really consider X, Y, you know, X solution with CPW, and a bunch of you have thumbs up on that, then that's something that we assume that you're going to be interested in. Or if there's some idea that somebody had a thumbs down on and we're going to give opportunity for why the thumbs down, that's going to be of real interest to you. So we imagine those might be more actionable. Aaron, is that kind of along the lines of what you're thinking? Or
I think it would be
Yes, I think so. Just pointing that out, that it'll be important to be able to take it down to another level of detail once we start digging in. But I think for today, it made sense to keep it high level.
yeah, totally. Very much heard. Any other comments? Big takeaways? Okay. So look forward to a synthesis of, you know, sort of a reflection back of what you all are thinking at this point. All right. So we are now going to turn our attention to what's next. And I think first, Aaron, I might turn to you in terms of framing. I think we have a couple slides. Tim, thank you. In terms of what are the topics, as we get into the March and April meetings, this is where we really dig into the substantive topics that the legislation requires. And we know that you're going to need a lot of information ahead of time, and you're going to need some time to do some thinking. And so I think, Aaron, you're going to first explain what part of the legislation we're addressing in these next couple meetings and how.
So as we look ahead, next meeting is March 5th. The first thing that we have to accomplish is finalize the interim report. And as I spoke to you about before, we would love specific feedback from you by next week in writing so that we can reflect that in the report. We'll send it back to you. And then what we want to do on March 5th is get a thumbs up from folks that report represents the work group's views. Second thing we want to do in that meeting is develop recommendations around conservation, climate resilience, agricultural and sound stewardship, recreation. Lloyd, noting your comment earlier, we'll think about how to address that, and other strategies to address potential user conflicts. So those are big buckets. They address a number of specific requirements in the legislation, but they relate to each other, right? Conservation and ag and recreation and climate resilience all are going to interact. And so that's why we're sort of bucketing them together. So we're going to hopefully come out of that meeting with some draft recommendations related to those topics. Tim, next slide. You will get a meeting summary with the information that has been promised to you. We'll ask you for additional ideas and sort of weighing the ideas that we've been discussing. So look forward to that information. As Ryan said before, in order to enable more time for you to work in these meetings, we're pushing more of the content, the sort of the preparatory content and the summaries outside of the meeting. That is a burden on you to then engage with that material, but we think that gives us the best chance of being able to make progress in the meetings. Week of the 23rd, you'll get some presentations, some information about other states. I know some of the comments we got where we want examples from other states. That's work that we'll be sharing with you. Next slide.
And this is, I think we're going to turn to Mark.
Mark? Yeah. Okay. So that's what you can look forward to, and we'll repeat that in the next couple of meetings.
And the one thing that was in the previous slide too is that we also there may be a need to engage one-on-one for those of you who have mapping tools that you really think are going to be useful for the work group to look at. For those of you who have know of examples or have specific ideas about recommendations. So we're also extending the invitation. We'll continue to have one-on-one meetings just to better understand your ideas and bring them to the next meeting.
The goal here is to get off the back foot and onto the front foot. We want to have more time in the meetings for discussions, for you to really engage with each other and engage with us and help us think through where you want to go on recommendations. So if we're going to be able to do that, we're going to have to do a lot of work between the meetings. So as we look forward to the different things that we're going to be talking about at the next meeting, and stay tuned, because we know, Lloyd, you may not be able to be at this meeting, or you definitely won't be able to be at this meeting, and recreation is on this list. So if things move around, we will tell you right away. But as we start thinking about these, we've already gotten a bunch of information from you on things that you want to know about these topics. So for example, on conservation, we know there's some interest in conservation leasing. How does that work? What do other states maybe do in that realm? We want to define some terms like long-term stewardship and option value. As it relates to agriculture, we know that there's some ideas around supporting young farmers, that there are, we want to know more about regenerative agriculture. What do we mean by that? How might that work in Colorado? And on recreation specifically, we've heard from you that you want to know what liability looks like when there's people accessing land that is occupied by an existing leasee. Who bears the costs of management? And how do you deal with both revenue and equitable access at the same time? So we do already have a bunch of information from you on these topics, but we also have some capacity to answer some questions for you. We've got the chance to do some research, to go look at what other states are doing. We don't want to only look at what other states are doing, because a lot of states outside of Colorado have more restrictive mandates, especially on the revenue side. So you may not learn everything you want to know from other states. So we will kind of scan the literature for best practices as well. And we will also be connecting with the state land board to make sure that everything that we're bringing to you is in context. A lot of this stuff they might already have definitions for, and we want to give those to you as well. So what we want to do right now is get just some quick ideas about, let me make sure I have the process right. We want to spend a little time right now getting some suggestions from you on the types of information that you might want to have in your hands before the next meeting, so you can have a productive discussion getting towards recommendations on these things. We are also going to follow up with a Google Sheet where you can send us questions and ideas and potential recommendations between the meetings. We can follow up with you individually. What we promise to do is be transparent. So everyone will have access to all of the different ideas and suggestions. And if we have a substantive conversation with someone, one of the members of the work group, that will also get shared back with everyone. And we're going to show our work. We're going to make sure you have access to the information from other states and any other research that we do. What am I missing?
I think just because we're coming up on lunch, we want to give you the opportunity right now. If you're champing at the bit on like, yes, please find out what other states are doing on X, or really would like more information on Y. If you have that in top of mind, feel free to share it right now. And otherwise, just know that you're going to have the opportunity to do this offline after today's meeting. So no urgency, but just if you want to share anything now, you're welcome to.
Perfect.
So we've gotten some information regarding the process that the State Land Board goes through to evaluate and consider stewardship trust inclusions. Got quite a bit of information about the things that are considered. And we've gotten information about instances where leases have been rejected as being incompatible. That's fine. What seems to be missing is an appeal for case studies or areas of concern on any stewardship trust parcels that may be out there that people have aren't being managed properly. And I don't know how to solicit that information, but if there are problems we ought to hear about that exist somehow we ought to try to reach out to find out if there are problems we have not yet heard about that may be festering. Of course, I don't know how people would know about that because they can't access the property to see, but if there are, we ought to hear about it.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I don't know if any land board folks have initial thoughts about that and whether there's that information or others, how that information might be solicited, investigated. Basically, like how to know if properties are being managed in the way that people want to see them managed. But I know that was a big topic of today's discussion too. Yeah, Erica.
Yeah, I had a very similar concern of more along the lines, I think is what you're saying is like, where's the accountability or enforcement mechanism for any type of lease? Is it actually meeting the needs and the guardrails that have been put up for good stewardship, whether that's agriculture or recreation or anything?
Great. Okay, we totally will capture that question and desire to hear more about that, and possibly if there's a gap, if maybe a recommendation can be made. I know also people said that it'd be really helpful to hear examples. When Nick, you were presenting about more examples about how these criteria, constraints, pursuits are applied to evaluating specific parcels and uses and leases. So I heard that too. Others top of mind? Anything else? Thank you for those initial thoughts. Online, RT, we can't see, but are there any hands up or any suggestions from folks?
We have a comment from Chad in the chat. Chad, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
And Chad,
I think I think you're muted here.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get to my mic. Yeah, so Arizona is the example I'm thinking of. They have lots of state land where where it's accessible or it's not, like, I guess, access isn't prohibited by other leases or whatnot. They have a permitting process, or you go online and you buy like a seasonal permit to access the land, to camp on it or to ride or recreate, or I guess do other activities, whatever you might be into, rock hounding. I don't know, but I'm not sure if that's something that could be looked at as a revenue source for Colorado on state lands.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad. Okay. Yes, Suzanne.
I had a collateral question, and that is on either changing lessees at the end of a lease. I remember reading in the land board notes where an agricultural lessee wanted to get a renewal on a recreation lease, and there was some issue about whether they should or somebody else would get the recreation lease. And then also on removal, if there's an attractive revenue producing, I guess I don't know if it'd be a nomination because the stewardship trust is still in effect, but a parcel is still in effect. But if something comes along, how it's evaluated against the natural values of that parcel. Would they be looking then for substitution of another parcel, or how does that all work?
It sounds like you're thinking both. How's that happening here, and how does that happen elsewhere in other states, or primarily how are we doing it here? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Suzanne. All right. Great. Useful to hear those examples. Okay. Before we take a quick break for everyone to grab lunch and use facilities and come back to prepare for our tour and hear from Nick Trainer, who's an agricultural lessee on State Land Board lands. And hi, Nick. We'll introduce you in a sec, and glad you're here. Just a reminder, so Aaron showed the next steps, but one of the next steps is as we prepare for the March meeting where we're focusing on agriculture, conservation leasing, maybe not recreation, that we may substitute that, climate resilience strategies, how to advance all those things and make them work best. We may be contacting and reaching out to you, and definitely inviting those of you with expertise in those areas and a lot to say to have one-on-one conversations to make sure we're bringing all of your expertise to that discussion. So just know that that's the case, and we also welcome that from you. All right. Anything else that needs to be said before we take a 10-minute break for lunch and people come back?
I think one of your handouts has our May meeting. Thank you for pointing it out, Erica, on May 27th. It is on May 28th, which is where you should have your hold on your calendar. Apologize for the typo. It's that Thursday. And just a reminder for future meetings, if you are planning to be online, if you could please let us know, because we're doing webinars, we need to make sure we get you a panelist link before the meeting, or else it's a kind of a scramble to get you a panelist link as you're joining. So just a future note for your own ease and less stress.
Yep. And remember that the next two meetings will be entirely virtual, which is going to make it really easy to do breakout groups. And we'll probably have multiple for each meeting on the different topics. So we probably will not do any more polling, but we will do breakout groups for you guys to talk with each other a lot. Good. And on the tour, we're going to be on buses, and we hope there's a lot of opportunity for interaction and discussion. Okay, grab lunch and come back in 10 minutes, and we are going to do 15 minutes of prep for the tour and hearing from Nick. Okay. This tour, before we take this tour, we wanted to hear from one of the State Land Board's agricultural lessees, Nick Trainer. I know Nicole and Elliot, you wanted to say a couple of intro words, and then we're going to segue into what to get ready for the tour. And so I'm going to pass to you first, or Nicole, whichever.
Can you hear me? Yep. Nicole, did you want to say a few words at the intro?
Yes, Elliot, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm at home with a cold, but I'm thrilled that you'll be going on a tour of Lowry Ranch. It's one of my favorite places. Lowry Ranch is an exceptional property. It really combines elements from across our portfolio, demonstrating how the board manages state trust lands to meet our dual mandate of revenue and stewardship that's spelled out for us in the state constitution. It's also a really great example of a large stewardship trust property supporting legacy leases, as well as new uses approved after that designation was put in place. And as you'll hear and see on the tour today, this property has been improved in many ways since the board acquired it, and especially since portions were placed into the stewardship trust. It has also produced a staggering $200 million in revenue for Colorado Public Schools. The key, in my view, has been layering leases and supporting lessee cooperation to minimize conflicts. As a former lessee of Lowry, I recall going to Lowry lessee meetings years ago with dozens of us around the table, including me and Nick Trainer, talking about the challenges we were seeing on the ground and cordially working through them together with expert guidance from State Land Board staff. And that same drive remains at the State Land Board today to find ways to produce more revenue by layering leases and supporting lessees on problem solving. And that's, in my view, an issue at the center of this work group's charge. So we thought Lowry would be a terrific showcase, not only because it is large and beautiful and close to the metro area, but because it provides an opportunity to see how these different land uses work in tandem on the same property. And with that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Elliot Hoyt, our Assistant Director of Sustainability and Working Lands.
Cool. Yes, this is it's an exceptional property. It's not a typical property, but it provides examples for a lot of the things that you all are talking about and looking at, and it's also close enough that we can all get together and get onto it and really see a number of things happening. I'm going to give a couple of words about sort of the history and context of the property, just because that's important and it's special, and then I'll throw it over to Nick and let him talk about his management of the agricultural lease on the property. So Lowry Ranch, the State Land Board Trust property, is a portion. It's a small portion of what was a 100-square-mile facility that was known as the former Lowry Bombing and Gunnery Range. So anybody who sort of knows the history of the state might know it in that context. So our property is a portion of that larger area. It was used for military operations for more than a quarter century before it was decommissioned. The 26,000 acres, roughly 40 square miles, that are Lowry Ranch, the trust lands, were transferred to the State Land Board in several transactions in the 1960s. So it was not part of the original Enabling Act. It's not the 16s and 36s. It's a different kind of property, but we have a number of those around the state. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, overseen by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, is continuing to clean up the site from past military activity. But as you will see, most of the property is available for leasing. And so it is very much an active site that we care for and that our lessees are engaged with. We have over a dozen leases on this property. And we'll talk about a number of them on the tour and give you details about that. We have grazing, which you'll hear more about in a minute from Nick. Oil and gas, solar energy, surface and groundwater, several recreation leases on it. So we talked about, is there only hunting? There's multiple different kinds of recreation leases on this property in particular. Ecosystem services leases, and we even have a lease with the Department of Military and Veteran Affairs for military training that still goes on the site and is integrated with everything that we're doing here. A portion of the Lowry Ranch was designated as part of the Stewardship Trust in 1998. The boundary was adjusted in 2008 to the current area of 22,000 acres. So all of the state trust lands south of Quincy are in Stewardship Trust. We have holdings north of Quincy that are not in the Stewardship Trust. So there's a distinction there. And I will also note that we currently have a joint planning agreement with Arapahoe County Open Space, Trust for Public Land, the Nature Conservancy, and Great Outdoors Colorado, which allows those partners to explore opportunities for recreation and conservation on Lowry Ranch. I'll talk for a minute about agriculture. It's very important to the State Land Board in general. I think you've heard that a number of times, but this particular property is a great example of how we work together with our agricultural lessees in partnership. So for more than a decade, I think since 2014, the lessee on this land, Trainer Cattle Company, has applied holistic management concepts and regenerative agricultural practices that have restored natural values of the land and improve the property in demonstrable ways. I think Aaron asked, how do we measure the difference between land before Stewardship Trust and land after? And I think we answered that by saying we don't have a ton of metrics and data to share, in part because we don't have a baseline in some cases, but this is an example of a property, and Nick can speak about it better than I can, that before it was in Stewardship Trust and we created the leases that we have compared to now, you really can see significant differences in terms of important ecosystem elements like the Piedmont prairie grasses and other kinds of systems that have improved because of the stewardship treatments that Nick in particular has brought to it. So you may not be able to see all of those benefits at this time of year. We wrestle a little bit with the idea of bringing you out on a rangeland when everything's dormant. There are a few people in the room who will be able to read the land and be able to tell what's there, but you have to believe Nick when he tells you that it's better than when he found it. So with no further ado, I think it's time maybe for you to tell your version of the story.
Hello. Thank you, Elliot. Working? You hear me okay? So I'm Nick Trainer. I'm the grazing lessee out on the Lowry Ranch. And like Elliot said, we've been there for about 12 years. We live right in the middle of the center of the property and raising our two young children there, which is just an amazing place to be raising kids. It's a little chaotic at times, but we've certainly been blessed to be able to raise our kids there. So backing up just a little bit of my history, I grew up on a small ranch in southeastern Colorado, 5th generation ranch, and that ranch just wasn't quite big enough to support two family members. And allow me to come back to the ranch. So I went to Colorado State University, started out with a degree in animal science, and then quickly realized that I wasn't getting near enough information about an integral part of the land livestock business, which is the resource stewardship side of it. So I got a master's degree in integrated resource management. And all along this time, I was hopeful that I could find a way to make it back to the family ranch and carry on that legacy. In the process of that, of course, the drought of 2002 completely devastated agriculture in the southeast corner of the state. So that pretty much diminished any hopes I had of getting back to the family ranch. So I took a job with a natural resource conservation service and served as a range management specialist for about 9 years. And the whole time I was working side deals trying to build a cow herd and figure out some way to get back to being a full-time rancher or following that path of being a cattle rancher full-time. And that's a really important piece of the story, because if it wasn't for Stewardship Trust land and the opportunity that we got on the Lowry Ranch, I think I would probably still be working for the NRCS, maybe running a few cows with my dad on the family ranch at side, but it wouldn't have been a possibility for me to become a full-time rancher. So in 2013, we applied for an RFP, and it was kind of a unique RFP. It was titled Holistic Plan Grazing Lease. And because of my work with the NRCS, I had quite a bit of experience working with progressive grazing management and had basically been studying ecology for the last 9 years and consulting with ranchers, helping them implement these progressive grazing strategies, regenerative, holistic type grazing. So boy, when I saw that title on that lease, it was pretty intimidating, a 25,000 acre lease, which drew the attention of a lot of really big operators. And, I was just kind of a peon, but the fact that it had that title at the top of it, I kind of thought we had a chance. So put in for the RFP and worked our butts off on kind of developing this concept to implement holistic plan grazing on this property. And we're fortunate enough to get the lease and have been there for 12 years. Well, actually, we've gone through another competitive bid, so we're on our second term on the ranch. So a little bit about that. How many of you are familiar, have heard the term holistic grazing or regenerative ag? Okay, so we've got pretty good exposure to that. So what I like to tell people, it's maybe the easiest way to explain it. I think you really have to discuss to understand holistic plan grazing. I think you have to first take a look and talk about how grasslands evolved. And grasslands evolved in North America with large grazing ungulates. Estimates are all over the board, but somewhere between 30 and 60 million head of bison roamed all over the plains. And those bison interacted with all the predators on the landscape, which basically created this system of, a large herd would come into a specific area and then oftentimes get bumped off by a predator. And Native Americans, for that matter, using the bison as a food source, constantly kept these animals moving. So they didn't just park in one general area for a whole lot of time, or until the first predator came along and bumped the herd. And what that created was, tens of thousands of years of evolution is these grasses evolved to withstand a grazing event. And then as the large ungulates moved off, or the bison herds moved off, they had an opportunity to recover. So what we do in holistic grazing is try and mimic that exact behavior. And the reason it works is because it's been working for tens of thousands of years. So the way we do it in modern day agriculture is with fencing, and we basically develop a strategy, a grazing strategy where we combine our cattle into large groups, and then we systematically move them throughout the ranch. And on the Lowry Ranch, we've got, if you include temporary pastures, we've fenced the property into about 65 paddocks. So to think about that, and I want you to kind of remember that number as you're driving through the ranch today. A lot of people think, oh gosh, they've fragmented this place up, and there's these awful barriers to wildlife, and really cut this place up with fencing. I doubt you'll see a fence today. What we use to fence the property is a single wire, really low impact, wildlife friendly fence. And most times you don't even recognize that they're out there. And most of the big game species have adapted to those single wire. They can go underneath and over the top really easy. But as you're driving through the ranch today, take note of that. And most people don't believe that we have that many pastures out there. The other thing I want you to recognize today, or try to look out for as you're driving through the ranch, is you're probably not going to see any cattle. And most people are really disappointed when they come out for a grazing tour on Lowry, because the cattle are all grouped up in one small pasture. And this time of year, we've got them in 3 different pastures. But on 25,000 acres, you wouldn't believe that there's 800 head of cattle out there right now. And basically, that's a really important point, because in the summertime, this is a terrible time of year to have a grazing tour. But in the summertime, you can really picture the idea. Okay, so we've got cattle in one pasture, one of 65 pastures on this ranch. So we've basically got 24,500 acres that are recovering from the last grazing event. And that's the most important piece of holistic grazing, is that recovery after a grazing event. And I think the land board staff would agree. We've got data sets. We've got a lot of subjective stuff. I probably should have brought some photo points today just to show you some of the contrast. But we are seeing some pretty amazing results after 12 years of this. I mean, we saw pretty incredible results after 3 years in, and I had no idea that we would see the kind of reaction that we did from this type of grazing. Part of the holistic, I'll back up a little bit. So part of the holistic management RFP that I applied for, they defined some pretty specific goals on the property. And Lowry's really unique because it's got basically functioning shortgrass prairie. It's got a remnant tall grass prairie within the center of it. And then we've got 3 amazing riparian corridors that run through the property. So in terms of ranches in Colorado, and I've spent a lot of time with the NRCS on different ranches. I don't know that I ever set foot on a ranch that was this diverse, from a wildlife perspective, from a different habitat types on the property. So it's really unique in that respect, that it's got all 3 of these different plant communities or almost eco zones within the ranch. So back to the holistic management plan, there's 3 main priorities on the property, or that we focus our management on. The riparian areas. So the riparian areas, were a little bit denuded. There was a previous grazing lessee on the property before us who did not practice the type of management that we did. And that's probably as light as I can say it. And the property, the lessee was actually removed because of his lack of management. And the ranch was really in tough shape whenever he left. In fact, they didn't put any cattle back on the property for almost 7 years because so much damage had been done because of poor grazing management on there. But the riparian areas were, we've got these beautiful cottonwood galleries on the ranch now, but when we set foot on the ranch, there was basically one age class of cottonwoods. And what had gone on with the previous grazing lessee was, there was these really old remnant trees that had been there for, 50, 60 years, probably prior to that lessee. But there were no young cottonwoods on the property. So basically these stream corridors weren't regenerating with woody species. So that was one of our main priorities that we wanted to tackle on the riparian corridors and on the ranch. And today we have places in these creek bottoms that you can't hardly walk through because the willow and woody recruitment down in these riparian areas has just exploded. And the interesting thing is the scientific community, a lot of times their first response is, let's just get cattle out of riparian areas because they have no place there. Well, the bison for tens of thousands of years spent time in the riparian area. The important piece of it is they didn't stay there. They didn't stay in any individual place very long. That corridor had an opportunity to recover from a grazing event. And with our management, we are trying to mimic that. So most of our riparian area pastures only get 3 or 4 days grazing in a year, or at least growing season grazing. And we've just seen this incredible response in there. We're just giving nature what it needs to thrive. And that's probably the biggest feather we have in our hat in terms of some results that we've seen on the property. Other two, we've got the remnant tallgrass prairie, which is a sandy foothill ecological site and grows just at an amazing plant community of kind of more what you would expect in the sand hills of Nebraska or the Flint Hills of Kansas. These remnant tallgrass species, a big blue stem, prairie sandreed, really unique for Colorado. We've got a piece of this remnant grassland that only occurs along the Front Range of Colorado. And all of you know what has happened on the Front Range of Colorado. Most of the Piedmont grassland in this state is now under houses. So we've worked with the Nature Conservancy in the past, who is very interested in protecting that plant community. And so we focused a lot of our grazing attention on keeping that remnant grassland healthy and intact and regenerating it in places that had been impacted from previous uses on the ranch. And then the last part, we have a lot of functioning shortgrass prairie, which I think you'll drive through most of that today. And in my opinion, is kind of the boring part of the grassland on the ranch. It's the short stuff and prairie dogs and, just not real fun to look at. But getting those tour buses down into the creek bottoms might be a little tricky too. So, but which is also a very, very important ecotype on the ranch. It's just disappearing at a rapid rate through cropping and urban sprawl, and very I can't remember the statistic, but a lot of imperiled grassland birds because of that disappearance in the shortgrass prairie. Let's see.
Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about layered leasing?
Layered leasing. Yep. And I don't know if I agree with that number. Are you sure it's 12? Nobody really knows how many lessees are on. I always say 20 plus, but maybe I'm getting a little excited with that. That's the other really, Lowry is truly unique in that all of these different leases are using the property. And I will certainly say that is the most challenging part of what I do, is managing all of this, really intensive ecological management on this property and trying to coordinate with all of these other lessees. What I can say is, the land board does a great job of facilitating just good interactions with those lessees. And I do my best to communicate with those folks as best we can. Yeah, there's always bad actors, but for the most part, it's pretty remarkable that all of us can accomplish these individual leases on this property and still reach these ecological milestones, and generate an amazing amount of revenue for the schools. I think it's truly unique in that respect, and I think a pretty good case study for what this vision that the land board has for these layered leases on the property. What else am I missing, Elliot?
Maybe open it up for questions and see.
Yeah.
What folks. Here.
Yeah, well, Nick, first of all, thanks for coming to address us and show us your ranch. It sounds like a really cool operation. Two quick questions for you. A lot of farmers and ranchers these days are having to find alternate sources of revenue off land, off the farm. Is that the case for you? Is this 100% of your economic livelihood, is your ranching endeavor?
This is my full-time gig. Yep.
Okay. And then, in terms of the holistic grazing plan that you have and just the regenerative ag in general, would you say that within the ranching industry in general, that most ranchers would think that they could make more money? It would be more economical for them to not employ those kinds of practices and maybe do more intensive grazing than what are you taking maybe a haircut or a loss compared to if you weren't employing those practices?
Actually, to the contrary. I think a lot of people are gravitating towards this type of management because it is more profitable, and it just makes sense when your cattle enterprise is centered around the health of the land. Literally, animals don't do well on land that's denuded or overused, and it affects profitability. And this type of management is really, really catching on, mostly out of necessity, because people, there's a lot of tradition left in agriculture. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that there aren't some bad managers out there, but I can tell you this: most of those folks are on their way out of the business because they're not taking care of the resource that they rely on. And where that disconnect ever came from, I don't know, or how those folks have survived as long as they have, but I can tell you there is a mass movement towards the regenerative, working with the land and working with the nature rather than against it. Does that answer your? Sure. And I might add one before you ask. I might add one quick thing. So actually today, and I'm missing it to be here to speak to you folks, but the land board recognizes that and has made, since I've been a lessee with the land board, has really developed a regenerative educational program. So a couple of times a year, and in fact, right now in Lamar, Colorado, there's a regenerative grazing conference that's free to lessees. Alejandro Carrillo, I don't know if any of you recognize that name, but brilliant holistic manager is giving a presentation to Colorado State Land Board lessees. So, a lot of credit needs to be given to the State Land Board for offering those events and really, really pushing their lessees that direction.
So I have two questions, and look forward to seeing the ranch you're running. But number one, I think in the very first meeting, Tyler, you had brought up some question about like, is there a common definition of regenerative agriculture in some of these terms? I mean, would all ranchers agree that what you're doing is regenerative? Would others have different definitions?
No, I don't think there is a solid definition for regenerative agriculture. In fact, I know over the years, it has been, it's been called so many different things. I could list off 15 different names or definitions for the type of grazing that I'm doing. And indirectly, I think the common thread with all of them is, and I think any successful management bases around the basic premise of we're going to develop goals for this property, ecological goals, and then we're going to build a plan that specifically addresses those goals. Then we're going to monitor that plan. We're going to monitor the results, and then we're going to adapt it. Nature's constantly moving, and any rigid management structure that you have, we turn out cows this day, this time every year, we don't ever move them, that's just what we do, is going to fail because nature is constantly moving, and any management system that isn't constantly adjusting with it is kind of doomed to fail. I don't know that that's the best definition of regenerative, but that's how I think of it. And for now 20 years of working with ranchers and now doing it myself, I think that is the root of successful regenerative management.
Great. So, and not to put you in an awkward position, but since we're kind of driving at this whole issue of monetary return as one of the main drivers of the state trust lands, is the amount you pay for the lease, how does that compare to leasing some other ranch that isn't run by the state land board, right? Like, is it at market rates? Is it because you're doing regenerative agriculture? Is it lesser amount? Is it more? I mean, again, don't want to, you have your landlord in the room, so I hate to have
I gotta be careful here. Well, now that you bring it up, I should be getting a discount. No, actually, to the contrary, I think from my experience, and we hold a couple of smaller private leases, we're paying more on the state land board. For a couple of reasons, though. It's a large property that I can, I don't got to patch together little 1,000-acre pieces to try and manage. The fact that this property is in one block is really appealing to a lot of ranchers. And I had to go through a competitive process twice. And the first round, the first RFP that I responded to, I think at the time became the highest grazing rate in the state because of the size of this property. And, for me, it was the ability to not be the day job guy and then cowboy at night. I could really focus my efforts on a larger property like this, not be spread out. And, so in most cases, state land board is very, very competitive with the private rates.
I'm happy to talk a little bit more about grazing rates and how we handle those on the bus. I want to take the time here because we want to be able to do a lap through the property and get you guys back by 3. But let's talk coordination about how we're doing this.
A couple of logistics, folks. We cannot leave anything in this room at all, so please take all your personal stuff with you. If you need to stop at your vehicle, feel free. The coaches are right outside the public entrance doors where we came in. We have two coaches out there. And what I would ask is that if we could get all the work group members directly on the coach that Elliot's on. Elliot's got primary talking points for the session. And then we've got some of our supportive staff that we want to have part of that conversation as well. So please be on Elliot's coach. And then if we've got technical group members that are going along, some of our consulting folks are going to be on the second coach, where we'll have the same set of talking points running, but the experts are going to be on the work group coach. So keep an eye on Elliot. He's squirrely. Make sure you don't lose him, and be on his coach if you would. So if we can be pretty expedient, it's currently 1:20 and we wanted to get this started at 1. And we will be coming back here at the end of the tour, at the end of the